I'm the highest civilization in the universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 601, Thunder Annihilation Array. The whole square suddenly became quiet. The noisy discussion stopped abruptly. Everyone looked at the platform. Hansji, who was hosting the auction, was attacked by a half-orc. Jill also opened his eyes wide on the rooftop not far from the square. In the eyes of everyone, this might be just an ordinary auction venue, but with the changes on the platform, the nature of this auction has changed. Just when everyone was at a loss and still looking at the platform, the tops of the 5 peaks outside the Wufeng district began to flicker slightly, and the rocks and soil on the tops of the peaks began to collapse and roll down. In just a moment, the original top of the mountain has become a hole, like a crater, and red light flashed deep in the hole, as if something was about to erupt. The ground around the mountain began to tremble slightly, and thick arcs flashed from the surface of the mountain, as if the entire mountain was discharging electricity. These arcs were immediately connected to the spaceships around the mountain. This was originally the birth of the spaceships, and such a dense number of spaceships were all wrapped in arcs. The 5 peaks were all like this. The parked spacecraft were like sleeping lions, without shields and attack power, more like lambs to be slaughtered. The staff near the peaks were even more at a loss. They looked up at the sky with terrified expressions on their faces. They didn't dare to do anything more. They turned around and ran away quickly. But compared to this powerful arc, these aliens had almost no chance of escape. The flash of lightning, just being touched, would immediately turn into ashes and nothingness. And those spacecrafts also fell from the sky with smoke after a few seconds. No matter the size or type of spacecraft, they were all turned into a pile of scrap metal under the arc, and fell beside the peak. At the top of the 5 peaks, the red light suddenly became intense, followed by a violent and harsh sound of kai kai cha cha, and a thick arc tens of meters long and wide flashed out from the mouth of the peak. The trajectory of the red arc was zigzagging and changing. The 5 peaks released arcs at the same time. The arcs shot out directly to a height of 10,000 meters. The 5 arcs merged together at once, and the location of the fusion was just above the building complex. The aliens in the building complex were also attracted by this strange phenomenon and looked up. What is that? What's going on? What happened? Various surprised voices kept coming out. Li Ming also looked up and saw that after the 5 red arcs merged, the fusion point instantly split and scattered. Countless small arcs shot in an arc to the open space between the 5 peaks, completely covering the entire Wufeng district. The red light kept flashing. In addition to the 5 huge and thick main arcs, the other small arcs had formed a large net, and the buildings in the Wufeng district and all the aliens were already covered by this large net. Waldro looked at this scene, and a sinister smile appeared under his fierce expression. The red light kept flashing on his face, just like the light shining on his face. It started. Everyone here will die. Ha 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 ha. Waldro laughed coldly. Li Ming glanced at the other party, and looked at the crowd below. They were in chaos, and fled in all directions. At this time, Jill, who was standing on a tall building in the distance, looked up at the sky with an extremely ugly face. He turned his eyes and looked at Nuire and Cannonbone beside him, whispering, "Things have changed, be prepared." Cannonbone and Nuire heard the voice, and the golden light on their bodies flashed, and energy had emerged. At this time, a figure slowly rose on the open space on the roof behind the 3 people. The person who came was Li Ming. As soon as Li Ming appeared, the 3 people turned around and looked, and their faces changed instantly. "Is it you?" Jill said first. Li Ming did not respond, but said directly, "The orcs have joined forces with the dark technology civilization. If we don't find a way to destroy the barrier above our heads, we may all die." As Li Ming was talking, his eyes looked at the high platform in the square below. Jill and the other 3 also turned their eyes, and saw that Hansji on the high platform suddenly twisted his body, and turned back into Li Ming's appearance. At this time, Waldro's sharp blade tentacles had already inserted into Li Ming's body. Seeing Li Ming's changes, he snorted and said, "Sure enough, it's really you." Li Ming on the high platform turned his eyes and looked back at him with contempt and replied, "Although I don't know how you recognized me, but it's too late to know now." Huh. Waldro was startled and didn't know what Li Ming meant. Jill and the other three on the roof of the building in the distance looked at the high platform and couldn't help but look back at Li Ming behind them. The two Li Mings appeared at the same time, which made Jill and others look around and puzzled. Li Ming took a few steps forward, stared at the platform, slowly raised his left hand, and put a finger in front of him, whispering, "Elemental clone explosion." After a sound, Li Ming beside Waldro suddenly shone brightly, like a beam of light, and light continued to scatter from his body. Waldro's face changed when he saw this, and his eyes widened, as if he had expected something, but it was too late. Boom. A deafening explosion sounded instantly, and the entire platform and the area around the platform were covered in smoke and dust, and everything disappeared in the smoke and dust produced by the explosion. Jill and others looked intently and saw a figure quickly rushing out of the smoke and dust. It was Waldro, but Waldro at this time was different from before. The whole side of his body was completely bloody and seriously injured. Although his life was saved, his combat effectiveness must have been greatly affected. Jill's eyes were looking at the explosion in the distance, but his consciousness was sensing the position of Li Ming behind him. He whispered secretly, "The elemental clone of the intelligent civilization. This rare ability, this guy can use it so skillfully. I have been in my sight since the moment he appeared on the high platform. Could it be that he was a clone from the beginning?" Jill whispered secretly. But at this moment, Li Ming's expression suddenly tensed up. His head turned sharply, and he looked to the side and above not far away, and exclaimed, "Not good." As soon as the two words came out, Li Ming jumped into the distance, and Jill and others also realized it later, but they also jumped away after hearing what Li Ming said. As soon as the four jumped off the roof, a beam of light shot over. Boom. Another loud noise was heard, and the top of the entire building was instantly shattered. Li Ming had already reached the top of another tall building, and Jill and cannon frame also fell to the roof of another building at the same time, leaving only Nuaya floating in the air. The debris from the explosion continued to fall to the ground, and a slender figure had already flown here. It was Rockburner. Rockburner raised his right hand, holding a silver pistol. The pistol was not big, more than a foot long, and looked a bit like a toy water gun, but the overall sense of science fiction was full, and it seemed extraordinary. His eyes turned, and finally stopped on Li Ming. He snorted and said, "Li Ming turned out to be just a second-level civilization. He destroyed the plans I have accumulated for hundreds of years. Now I will let you enjoy the fun of death." Li Ming's expression tightened, his face was not good, and his eyes widened a little. Rockba has a 2.4 level civilization, 4 levels higher than Li Ming, and is the second interval of the second level civilization. This gap is already higher than Li Ming's limit. In addition, Li Ming's knowledge of dark technology is almost zero. Fighting with him must be extremely dangerous. At this moment, another figure flew over in the sky. It was Paget. This person is also a 2.4 level civilization, a secondary civilization world of the Hydra Centauri supercluster. When he saw Rockburner, he was furious and whispered, "It's really a dark technology civilization, and it has been hidden for so many years." As he spoke, his hands clenched into fists, and a faint light flashed on his body. The situation at this time became tense. On the surface, it seemed that Rockburner was extremely unfriendly. After all, in addition to Li Ming and Paget, there were 3 people including Jill, who were all trying their best to reject the dark technology civilization. The advantage in numbers made Li Ming not so nervous. Rockburn looked at Paget who had just arrived, and then glanced at the others. Under his fierce expression, the corners of his mouth rose slightly. After a light snort, he whispered, "Don't worry, today, you will all die." As he spoke, he looked up at the sky and saw that the red arc net in the sky was slowly lowering. Chapter 602, Thunder. The huge net formed by the red arcs was constantly decreasing in height, like a raised net being flattened little by little. Looking up along the direction of Lockburner's eyes, the others also noticed this. Judging from the shape of the arc, its power was extraordinary. If it hit anyone, the consequences would be unacceptable to any life. Lockburner just looked up casually, and his eyes immediately returned to the others. This is the thunder extinction array that I built with the wealth accumulated in the cruise bay. I didn't expect it to be activated at this time. But then again, how could I allow you to live until the thunder extinction approaches? As soon as the voice fell, Lockabana's left hand suddenly stretched out, and 3 metal plates of different colors appeared in his palm. The 3 metal plates were only the size of the palm, blue, red, and black respectively. Then he clenched his palm tightly, and 3 colors of light shot out from the gaps between his fingers. As soon as this action appeared, Paget's expression tightened, and he moved his body and ran straight towards the other party. His figure flashed, and the surface of his clenched fist flashed with purple light, and he smashed it towards Rockbana. His body movement speed was extremely fast, almost in the blink of an eye. Rockbana's eyes rolled, but he did not dodge. In the eyes of others, this punch was close to Rockbana's brain, and it seemed that it would hit him. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and Paget's fist hit the void abruptly, just a few meters away from Rockbana. In the air, this punch seemed to hit the air. What's going on? Joel's expression tightened, and he looked at it intently, thinking in his heart. I saw that under Paget's fist, a grey object gradually appeared, and the grey continued to expand. When it was fully revealed, it was clear that it was a huge shell. The hard surface of the shell flashed with light, like a smooth mirror. Bounce. A gentle voice came from the shell. As this word was spoken, the surface of the shell made a muffled hum sound, and powerful energy sprayed out. Paget was ejected, and flew far away. The shell slowly opened, and Fidelia's red figure slowly emerged. As soon as she came out, she let out a strange and charming laugh and said, "Has the tense and exciting battle finally begun?" Rockbana smiled slightly, and swung his left hand to Jill and others. 3 metal discs of different colors flew out of his hand. Not long after the metal discs left his palm, there was a muffled bang sound, and beams of light were released from the discs. The dazzling light was like 3 suns in the sky, making it impossible to look directly at it, but after a few seconds, the light faded and disappeared little by little. The 3 metal discs had disappeared, and were replaced by 3 large robots. The 3 robots corresponded to the colors of the previous 3 metal discs, blue, red, and black. The robots were nearly 5 meters tall, and had a burly appearance. Their shoulders and backs were covered with metal spikes, and there was a protruding prismatic metal plate on their chests, which looked extremely hard. The appearance of the 3 robots and Fidelia made Li Ming frown. The situation immediately became unfavorable to Li Ming. The 3 robots looked extraordinary, and the situation was subtly reversed. Rockbana's eyes returned to Li Ming again, and he whispered, "I will kill this guy myself. The rest is up to you." Fidelia smiled, looked at Paget not far away, and said, "I don't have any problems here." Hearing this, Rockbana's eyes slightly wrinkled, and his figure shot out, and went straight to Li Ming. Li Ming was also paying attention to the other party. Seeing that he was running towards him, Li Ming moved and jumped into the distance. Seeing Li Ming running away, Rockbana snorted coldly, and slowly raised his right hand. There were 3 light spots on the pistol. At this time, the 3 light spots were completely lit. He aimed the gun head in his hand at Li Ming, who was running away, just like a shotgun ready for the prey who was desperately running away. Run away. Humph. You can't run away. His arm moved with the pistol, and the scope of the gun was always facing Li Ming, and his finger was already on the trigger. Click, a light flash of white light, a beam of light shot out from the muzzle, and the next second, boom, a loud noise. The top of the building in the distance exploded directly. Li Ming flew into a building, although he was not hit, but under the shockwave, Li Ming's body also rolled a series of times in the building, before he stabilized his body. After the smoke and dust, a huge gap appeared on the tall building, which was caused by the pistol shooting just now. Li Ming squatted behind a wall inside the building, frowned slightly, and whispered, "This power. It would be bad if I was it." It seemed that Li Ming had already hidden in a hidden place, and he was still inside the building, and could not be detected at all. But the flying Rockbana smiled slightly, flipped his left hand, and took out a pair of glasses. While wearing glasses, he said, "This way, we can sense Brother Zuhu's silence thunder." Zuhu had previously placed a breath mine on the top of a building, and the breath enveloped the entire Wufeng district building complex. This breath can easily see the location of any life, but it is impossible to see it directly without the ability of the blood hunter. At this moment, after Rockburner put on the strange glasses, the placement point of the silent thunder and the radiation circle of the silent thunder were fully presented. The most important thing is the role of the breath, which can easily see the exact location of the target. So he hid here. Rockburner smiled coldly, slowly raised the pistol in his hand, and prepared for Li Ming's location. Although Li Ming was hiding in the building, under the effect of the silent thunder, Li Ming's position was completely exposed, as if he had no escape, just hiding in a transparent building. The muzzle of the gun was pointed at Li Ming, with an extremely fierce expression on his face, and his fingers lightly pressed, and a whoosh sound was emitted. Boom. A violent explosion sounded. There was a huge gap in the building. After another explosion, the high-rise building actually broke and collapsed. The debris flew, and the materials used in the building collapsed directly. Under the shockwave, Li Ming rushed out of the stairs, and fell from the air. However, before his body landed on the ground, the cloak behind him suddenly shook, and turned into a pair of white feather wings. With just a slight flap of the wings, Li Ming's body shot out like a sharp arrow, and flew away again. Li Ming's actions were all under the control of Rockburner, and his figure quickly caught up with him. Li Ming's flying altitude was relatively low. He shuttled back and forth in the high-rise building, just like shuttling between the big trees in the jungle. If he was not careful, he would lose his target. Li Ming also used the building as a cover, to cross left and right. The speed of Xingyan Wing was naturally extraordinary. If it was an ordinary alien, he would have long lost Li Ming's position at this moment, but with the help of Zilei, Rockburner was under his control, no matter how Li Ming avoided. After a series of flights, Li Ming entered a building again. Li Ming, who was hiding again, was confident that the other party would not find him. Of course, hiding blindly was not Li Ming's purpose, but it would be better if he could avoid direct contact and let the Pumi civilization and Dulang civilization solve the matter. Hiding behind a wall, Li Ming raised his right hand, and a green light flickered in his palm. Then a green dragon formed, and he threw it over his head, and the green dragon shot out. At this time, Rockburner had locked Li Ming's position. Looking at Li Ming's hiding figure, he smiled again and whispered, "A game of hide and seek? What a pity." As he spoke, he raised his right hand again. Only one of the 3 light spots on the pistol was still on. Rockburner flew to the building not far from where Li Ming was hiding, raised his right hand, and aimed it at Li Ming's position. Rockburner's actions were all detected by Li Ming's green dragon, which made Li Ming frown slightly. What's going on? This guy seems to know where I'm hiding. Is it also spiritual power? Li Ming whispered to himself, but as soon as he said this thought, he shook his head slightly to deny it, and whispered again, "Impossible. With my wisdom ability, if the other party is a spiritual civilization, there is no reason why I can't find it." Chapter 603, Unconscious Sensing Ability. What's going on? Li Ming looked puzzled. When chasing just now, Li Ming relied on the flexibility and speed of Xingyan Wing to quickly shuttle through the tall buildings. Even if he didn't completely get rid of the opponent, he would not be found so easily, which made Li Ming suspicious. Rockburner in the sky had already pointed the muzzle of the gun at Li Ming. His finger pulled the trigger again, and a white light flashed from the muzzle. The building directly made a loud boom sound. Waste stone debris fell from the sky. This building was relatively narrow. Under one blow, the building broke and fell directly. Li Ming's flying dragon noticed Rockburner's attack intention in advance, so he jumped out of the building before the opponent attacked. Li Ming's actions were naturally under Rockburner's eyes. Seeing Li Ming dodge in advance, Rockburner also frowned and uttered a surprise sound of ha. After leaving this building, Li Ming's figure immediately entered the next building, and Rockburner's eyes also shifted to the building that Li Ming had just entered. The body floated slowly in the air and came to the side of the building where Li Ming was hiding. The light spot on the pistol had completely disappeared. Rockburner put the pistol away and took out a handle. The handle was cylindrical, like a flashlight, but not big, similar to an ordinary sword handle. The bullet will take a while to recover, so we can only use this to solve it first. After all, it's just a 2nd level civilization. As he said this, he pressed his hand lightly, and the sword handle flashed, and a 2-meter long light blade shot out from it. At this time, Rockbunner and Li Ming were both under each other's surveillance. They knew each other's behavior, but they didn't know that they were under each other's observation. Li Ming frowned slightly, and after thinking for a while, he whispered, "If it's not spiritual civilization, then it must be other means." In this case, Li Ming already had his own ideas in his mind. At this time, Rockbunner outside moved and prepared to approach, but as soon as his body moved, his brows frowned. Under Rockbunner's vision, Li Ming, who was hiding in the building, suddenly split into two, from one Li Ming to two Li Mings. The two Li Mings flew out from two directions. Rockbunner stared at Li Ming, who was running away in two directions. He immediately found something unusual. Although the two Li Mings looked the same, their auras were completely different. One was a complex body, and the other was a single form. Under the aura of Li, they were clearly compared. Rockbunner's eyes immediately turned to the complex body of Li Ming, and whispered, "This must be the real body." As he spoke, his body shot out, and went straight to Li Ming. As soon as Rockbunner's body moved, Li Ming, who was flying, immediately noticed it. He turned his head and looked back, thinking, he is coming directly to the real body. This guy can actually distinguish my elemental clone. He can directly detect my unknown, and can also identify the clone. Whispering, Li Ming looked up at the sky, and the red electric net seemed to be a few points closer to the ground. "Then, we can only fight," he said fiercely in his heart, and his body suddenly stopped where he was. When Rockbunner, who was chasing, saw Li Ming suddenly stop, he was surprised, but soon he smiled and said, "It seems that you can't avoid my pursuit, so you take the initiative to challenge me." A few dozen meters away from Li Ming, Rockbunner stopped, looked at Li Ming coldly, and said, "It seems that you are ready to die." Li Ming stared at him with his eyes, raised his right hand gently, and a white light flashed in his hand, and a light blade appeared in his hand. Looking at Li Ming's posture, Rockbunner's mouth corners slightly raised, and the original smile turned into an angry and ferocious expression before it unfolded. He said, "Let my plan, that has been brewing for hundreds of years, go to waste, and you are still posing like this. Go to hell." With a loud shout, Rockbunner shot down, and Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly and rushed forward. Bang bang bang, the light blades collided with each other, and the energy ripples continued to spread in circles under the collision. The fierce close combat unfolded in the sky with the flashing of light blades. After just a few rounds, Li Ming already felt very exhausted. Rockbunner's lightsaber skills and attack strength were extraordinary. The comparison between Li Ming and him was like an ordinary person fighting a professional boxer. The opponent's well-trained skills seemed to be the unique ability of the system, and Li Ming's keen eyes could not capture the opponent's consciousness, which put Li Ming at a disadvantage. Just after blocking the previous attack, the next attack came immediately, with a tricky and extremely dangerous angle. Li Ming could only fend back and forth in panic. While Rockbunner was attacking, he kept saying, "I can't believe that you, a second-level civilization, have a decent melee ability. It's a pity." As soon as the voice fell, Rockbunner kicked out while Li Ming was unable to respond. The kick hit Li Ming's abdomen, and he felt a sharp pain, as if his abdomen was hit by a speeding car. Swoosh, bang, Li Ming's body flew out, and hit a tall building not far away. With a loud noise, gravel and dust flew everywhere, and Li Ming's figure disappeared in it. Melee combat is not good. I can only rely on long-range combat, Li Ming whispered, and his body slowly sat up from the ruins. He raised his head slightly, and looked at the sky outside from the hole in the building where he hit. Rockbunner was looking at this place coldly. He stood up, and walked slowly out, stopped at the hole in the building, holding the broken wall with one hand, and looked up at the sky. Seeing Li Ming, who was safe and sound, Rockbunner's expression changed slightly, and whispered, "The time agreed with Brother Bloodhunter is getting closer and closer, so let's kill this person directly." As he said this, the handle held in Rockbunner's right hand suddenly made a Z sound and the light blade was retracted, and then he moved his body, and prepared to pounce on Li Ming. But at this moment, a figure suddenly flashed behind Rockbunner, and Li Ming suddenly appeared with a lightsaber in his hand, aiming at Rockbunner's head. This sudden attack startled Rockbunner, and a black light flashed on his body, and a shield appeared. Bang! A violent muffled sound was heard, and Li Ming's light blade chopped heavily on the black shield, but the shield was not affected at all, as if two pieces of metal collided with each other. Li Ming, who was at the edge of the building, was also shocked when he saw this. He quickly raised his left hand, put a finger in front of him, and whispered, "Explode." The Li Ming who attacked Rockbunner was the elemental clone from before. Because Rockbunner had the ability to see through Li Ming's position, he did not hold much hope for this sneak attack on Li Ming, but at this time, the attack was surprisingly successful, which surprised Li Ming. Li Ming quickly activated his consciousness and wanted to quickly detonate the clone, but at this moment, the clone stayed in place without moving. What's going on? Li Ming looked shocked. A careful look revealed that the abdomen of the elemental clone was actually tightly grasped by a big hand behind Rockbunner. Rockbunner's back was covered with mechanical armor. At this moment, a mechanical arm extended out and grasped Li Ming's waist. This mechanical hand also had a secret. While holding Li Ming's clone, the 5 fingers of the hand were constantly absorbing the clone's energy. The clone was originally an energy body. How could it explode under the absorption of the 5 fingers? In a few seconds, the entire clone turned into starlight fragments and disappeared on the spot. Most of its energy was absorbed by the mechanical hand. Li Ming was surprised by this method. His tense expression relaxed slightly at this moment. He thought to himself, dark technology civilization is indeed the biggest opponent of other civilizations. If it was the original body that was grabbed just now, it would be bad. But the clone was able to sneak attack successfully. It means that the position that this guy can sense is not 360 degrees without dead angles. Li Ming whispered secretly. Just as Li Ming guessed, although the other party could find Li Ming's exact location through objects, this sensing was limited to the front of the other party. This was different from the sensing of mental power, which was a regional sensing centered on the ability user. Chapter 604. Nito's clone explodes. As long as they are within a certain area, whether they are up, down, left, right, or behind a cover, they will be detected by the spiritual consciousness. Mastering this point is extremely important for Li Ming's next battle. It turned out to be the clone just now. Rockbunner whispered. At this time, Li Ming's right hand flipped slightly, and a black sphere appeared in his hand, which was Niteng. When Li Ming used Niteng before, he used the green buds on Niteng, which was the branch ability of the artifact. After entering the second level civilization, Li Ming can directly use Niteng to fight. Compared with Qian Li Ming is more proficient in Niteng. Qian this magic weapon, Li Ming has not yet fully mastered its ability. The only ability he is proficient in is the ability to hook the enemy's soul. Facing this powerful enemy in front of him, Li Ming naturally has to use his strongest ability. He clenched his right hand tightly, and the green light flashed. The Niteng in his hand suddenly became a phantom, and then sank into Li Ming's palm little by little, just like something slowly sinking into the water. After Nitito completely entered his right hand, a mark appeared on the palm of the attacker, which was exactly what Nitito originally looked like. Then, vines began to spread from the palm. These spreading vines were not real vines, but grew along Li Ming's skin like tattoos. In just a few seconds, Li Ming's entire right arm was completely wrapped in vine patterns, just like Li Ming's right arm was covered with vine tattoos. However, because of the problem of clothes, only Li Ming's palm could be seen from the outside. This is the first time to use this ability in a mixed way. It should have a good effect, but this consumes too much energy. Li Ming whispered, and circles of blue halos appeared on the soles of his feet again. Although the subtle changes in Li Ming's hands were very weak, Rockbunner still noticed it carefully, but he didn't care too much on his expression, but whispered, no matter what ability it is, in front of absolute strength, it's just a formality. As he said this, Rockbunner waved his right hand, put away the hilt of the sword, and took out the previous pistol again. At this time, the 3 lights on the gun had lit up. Rockbunner clenched his right hand tightly, and a sizzle sound was heard. The entire right arm mechanically rotated, and pieces of metal rolled out from the inside of the arm. These metal devices seemed to be in the flesh of his arm. At this moment, they appeared and directly broke the clothes on his arm, and formed a huge metal arm. The metal fragments were like a puzzle. After a while of rotation and flipping, in addition to the entire right arm, the pistol was also wrapped up, leaving only the muzzle outside. This huge change made Li Ming stunned, and his right hand was also clenched tightly. The next blow will directly end your life. Because of time issues, I can't play with you anymore. Goodbye, kid. As he said this, the mechanical right arm slowly raised and pointed the muzzle at Li Ming. Although it was not clear what ability the other party was going to use, it could be heard from his tone that this blow must be extraordinary. The muzzle flashed white light, and a vortex-shaped light wave rotated at the muzzle. Li Ming opened his eyes slightly, and a blue light flashed in his eyeballs, and a triangular pattern appeared. Suddenly he leaped, and ran straight at the other party. Looking at Li Ming who was coming towards him, Luke Bernard showed disdain and whispered, "What a fool you are." As soon as he finished speaking, the white light from the muzzle of the gun suddenly shone. Phantom Dragon. Li Ming's eyes widened immediately. Luke Bernard, who was about to shoot, suddenly frowned, his head buzzed, a burst of pain came out, and his eyes blurred instantly. Luke Bernard didn't understand why, and slapped his forehead with his left hand. "What's going on?" Luke Bernard gritted his teeth tightly. After a second, the blurred vision immediately recovered, but Li Ming who was flying towards him suddenly disappeared. Instant light slash. Li Ming shouted, and slashed horizontally with his right hand. "If you want to see it, you must get it." Luke Bernard suddenly turned around, from his back to Li Ming to facing Li Ming. This turn was not a normal human body turn, but the lower body did not move, and the upper body turned directly from the waist. "Too slow." Rockbanner shouted, his left hand suddenly stretched out, grabbed Li Ming's neck, and at the same time, the barrel of the cannon in his right hand was directly aimed at Li Ming's abdomen. "Go to hell." Rockbanner suddenly shouted. White light flashed and scattered, and rays of light scattered, and directly penetrated Li Ming's body. "Nato clone explode." Li Ming's words were almost spoken at the same time as Rockbanner's voice. Li Ming's feet fell down, and it was another Li Ming. Rockbanner had already noticed this, and his eyes swept over, and his face changed drastically, because the Li Ming who fell down was the real body, and the Li Ming that he grabbed with his left hand and pointed at with the muzzle of his right hand was just an energy body. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and the seemingly powerful hand cannon did not emit a huge power, just like a balloon bursting in a closed space, and then a dull sound was heard, and there was no other abnormality. Rockbanner opened his eyes wide, with an expression of disbelief on his face, and whispered, What's going on?" The next second, Li Ming, who was hit by the hand cannon, suddenly flashed green light, and turned into vines and flew out. The vines entangled and grew, occupying the entire sky in just a moment, and Rockbanner also disappeared in the sea of vines in an instant. Li Ming's body slowly fell to the ground, and the vine pattern on his right arm quickly faded back into the palm of his hand, and a knee vine that had originally sunk into his palm also reappeared. Li Ming was panting at this time, feeling a sense of powerlessness, and his body leaned over and collapsed to the ground in a half-squatting state. Turning his right hand, the neat vine was still in his palm. Li Ming just glanced at it casually and then clenched his right hand, putting it away, and whispered, "It seems that the use of the artifact is not so simple. There is no reason why the second level civilization cannot control it." Whispering like this, Li Ming immediately raised his left hand, and a faint light flashed, and a pill appeared. It was the Zingan pill. He put it into his mouth, and swallowed the pill directly. Looking up at this time, the vines in the sky have formed a vine ball, like countless snakes entangled together, densely packed, and constantly wriggling. At this moment, in the distance of this area, a spaceship suddenly appeared with a bus, and there was a person standing on the top of the spaceship. It was the Blood Hunter. Looking at the vine ball in the distance with cold eyes, the Blood Hunter whispered dissatisfiedly, "Sure enough, this idiot still needs me to take action." As he said this, he raised his hand slightly, showing a shooting posture. A little light flashed on his empty hands, and a sniper rifle emerged. The scope was aimed at the vine ball in the sky, and his finger gently placed on the trigger. He looked at the vine with one eye and whispered, "Annihilation bullet." Then his finger pulled the trigger. Swoosh. The bullet shot out from the muzzle, and arrived in front of the vine in just a flash. Buzz. A muffled sound was heard, like a gust of wind suddenly blowing, and in a blink of an eye, all the vines turned into ashes, just like a ball of cotton after burning, instantly turning into ashes. The black ashes floated with the wind and dissipated in the air. At this time, a figure fell from it. With a thump sound, it was like a pile of scrap metal fell to the ground, not far from Li Ming. Li Ming frowned, his eyes widened a little, and looked at the place where the thing fell not far away. Creaky sounds were heard, and a figure slowly stood up. The figure was timid, and only pieces of black metal were left on his body, as if a robot was left with only its core components. Only half of his legs were left, one of his arms also disappeared, and even though 1/3 of his head was missing, he still stood up, and walked towards Li Ming step by step. Just after taking a few steps, a series of beeping sounds came from his body, and Rockburner stopped immediately. The blood hunter in the distance looked at this place through the lens of the sniper rifle and whispered, "Don't cause trouble anymore. It's time to leave here." When Rockburner heard this voice, he turned his head and looked at the position of the blood hunter in the distance, then looked at Li Ming again, looked up at the red arc that was approaching in the sky, and said coldly, "Wait for death slowly, kid." Chapter 605, Absolute Restraint. Rockburner's figure gradually faded away and finally disappeared from Li Ming's sight, but Li Ming was still cautiously prepared for the battle. He looked at the direction where Rockburner was going away, and a spaceship flew quickly. A blue light flashed at the bottom of the spaceship, and a figure entered from the ground. It was Rockburner. Li Ming just watched from a distance, frowning slightly. The spaceship did not stay for long. After turning around, it broke through the air and flew directly into the depths of the sky. After confirming that Rockburner had really left, Li Ming breathed a sigh of relief. As a divine weapon, the vines summoned by netting are extraordinary in strength and attack, but just now they were destroyed by an unknown attack. This is what shocked Li Ming. Of course, Rockburner did not die under netting's high-density attack. Looking at the direction where the spaceship left, Li Ming's heart was full of thoughts. The attack that saved Rockburner was definitely extraordinary, and what kind of civilization dark technology was became more mysterious. Although Rockburner had left, Li Ming frowned slightly after looking up at the top of his head. The red arc in the sky was getting closer and closer. Although the arc was extremely powerful, the spaceship just now flew away directly from it, as if it was not affected by the arc. Looking back, looking at the gradually lowered red arc, Li Ming frowned slightly, moved his body, and slowly flew up. As his figure rose, Li Ming's eyes looked into the distance. The battle in that place was still going on. Li Ming ignored the battle situation and locked his eyes on a spaceship. The spaceship was the one that Waldro had driven before, and inside it were Tanjing and Big Zhu were rescued by Li Ming. The people of the dark technology civilization have retreated, and the war should not happen. Now is the opportunity to join the second level civilization world. Whispering in his mouth, Li Ming moved and flew towards the place where the battle was going on. Li Ming's ultimate goal is to enter the world of the second level civilization. Without the dark technology civilization, there will only be the orc civilization. With wings flashing, Li Ming's figure quickly came to the vicinity of the previous square. The spaceship was still in the air, but the area was already in a mess, and the fight was still going on. Nuar was dealing with the black robot, which held a huge mechanical sword in its hand. It was more than 2 meters long and more than 2 feet wide. White arcs danced on the blade, and each swing of the sword was accompanied by powerful electrical energy. With a swing, it could instantly destroy a tall building, and Nuar's attack ability was a square energy block, just like an energy matrix. Not only was the defense amazing, but the attack power was also extremely powerful. However, the black robot was extremely hard, and it was unknown what material it was made of. High-intensity attacks had no effect on it. The cannon bone on the other side held a huge axe, corresponding to the red robot. The red robot had no weapons, but could release high-temperature flames, and its mecha could also continuously release high temperatures, so even if you approached it, you would be in danger of being burned. In this case, the cannon bone's attack became extremely difficult. Finally, there was Jill, who corresponded to the blue robot. This blue robot can release blue cold currents, and has the ability to freeze. Fortunately, Jill is agile and can fight head-on, but he is not at a disadvantage. Li Ming saw all this from afar, and his eyes widened a little. Dark technology civilization is really powerful. The combat power of a few robots is comparable to that of a level 2.3 civilization. He marveled in his heart. It must be admitted that once robots with this attack strength appear in large quantities and attack the level 2 civilization world, they will be unstoppable. Just as Li Ming was watching the battle, Nuaya was the first to discover Li Ming. She turned her head to look at Li Ming, and her eyes widened a little, all with an expression of disbelief. The black robot she was dealing with swung its long sword, and took advantage of Nuaya's distraction to cut it head on. Nuaya was even more shocked. Just as she was about to do something, Li Ming suddenly flashed and appeared in front of Nuaya, and raised his hand to aim at the black robot. A green shadowy hand stretched out from along Li Ming's arm, and grabbed the black robot. The robot, which was about to attack, stopped. After all, the robot was still a robot, with program systems and commands inside. Li Ming's mental power only invaded it in an instant, and a few seconds later, buzz. There was a slight sound, and a dazzling white light scattered from the black robot. The light was so bright that people couldn't look directly at it, but after the light, the black robot disappeared, and turned into a black metal disc. Li Ming smiled slightly, and waved his hand gently. The metal disc immediately fell into Li Ming's palm. His eyes sank slightly, and looked at the metal disc in his hand. Li Ming's face changed again and again, his eyebrows tightened, and he thought to himself, this is the product of dark technology civilization. He clenched his palm, and the metal disc disappeared, and was collected by Li Ming. Nuaya, who had been standing behind Li Ming, opened her eyes wide at this moment, with an expression of disbelief on her face, and thought to herself, this guy actually. The robot that Nuaya fought with all her strength, but Li Ming easily defeated it with one move, which made Nuaya unbelievable. But Li Ming knew very well that, although it was not difficult for him to deal with this robot, it did not mean that the robot was not strong enough. It was just that Li Ming's ability just happened to restrain this robot. If he did not have a strong mental power, it would probably take some time to deal with this robot by fighting head on. He glanced behind him, glanced at Nuaya's position, and flew away without saying a word. At this time, the blue robot was launching an icy attack, and Jill was helpless to dodge around. But the next moment, a figure suddenly flashed, and there was already another person behind the blue robot, and it was Li Ming. As soon as he approached, Li Ming's face changed slightly, and he whispered, "This cold air." The blue robot's armor continued to release extremely cold air, as if it would be frozen, as long as it approached the opponent, and under the extreme cold, the energy attack would also drop sharply, which is undoubtedly a good defense. At this time, the blue robot also noticed Li Ming's position. Just as he was about to do something, his body suddenly stiffened, and his eyes, that were originally flashing with light, gradually extinguished, and his crazy attack also stopped. Li Ming's outstretched right hand had turned into a huge blue shadow hand that firmly grasped his body. Jill in the distance also paused and looked here curiously. But the next moment, white light suddenly shot out from the blue robot, and the strong light flashed and disappeared. After the light, the blue robot disappeared, leaving only a metal plate in Li Ming's hand. Jill saw all this scene, her mouth slightly open, her tongue bridge not moving, and she was shocked in her heart. This guy can control the robots of the dark technology civilization? After putting away the blue metal plate, Li Ming also glanced at Jill lightly. His eyes turned again. On one side was Cannonbone, who was fighting with the red robot, and on the other side was Paget fighting with Fidelia. Li Ming did not move, but turned his right hand, and a shadow of a green dragon appeared in his hand. He threw it at the red robot in the distance, and the green light flashed, and it immediately sank into the body of the red robot in the distance. The red robot's eyes were originally flashing, but as the green light entered, the light in the eyes turned green. The attack stopped immediately, and it turned and flew towards Li Ming. Cannonbone, who was fighting with it, did not know why, and the red robot flew to Li Ming's side and slowly stopped, motionless in place. Li Ming looked at the robot with a satisfied look on his face. He turned his eyes and looked at Paget, who was still standing there. Both were 2.4 level civilizations, the second interval of the second level civilization. As a half-orc of Fidelia, it was obviously stronger than Paget. In the battle, Paget could only be in a passive defense. Li Ming raised his hand and pointed, as if giving an order. The red robot moved and headed straight for the battlefield. At this time, Joel, Nuire and others slowly flew to the vicinity of Li Ming. Seeing Li Ming's operation, the three of them looked at each other in surprise. Chapter 606, Thunderkill. Fidelia's shell has a strong defensive ability, and ordinary physical attacks are difficult to work. In addition, Fidelia has the ability to create illusions. This illusion is not Li Ming's Phantom Dragon. The Phantom Dragon uses mental power to attack, making the target's consciousness confused, and creating a short-term visual illusion. Fidelia's illusion uses energy to create an existence that is exactly the same as the original body, but this is not a clone, it is just a visual illusion, and it does not have the ability to attack. Although Paget has a strong power civilization attack ability, it is difficult to lock the target's true body under many illusions. More importantly, the opponent's shell defense is extremely strong. Paget's eyes turned around, looking at the illusions in front of him with a frown. I can't tell which one is the real body, and Paget was whispering to himself when a red light suddenly flashed in the sky and a huge red robot fell into the group of illusions. The sudden attack of the red robot startled Paget, and he was at a loss. The next moment, the surface of the red robot suddenly flashed red. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and a burst of flame spread out from the red robot. The flame spread out in a circular shape, and all the illusions were dispersed at once. In the face of this high temperature attack, Fidelia's true form was also revealed. Flame attack. Fidelia gritted her teeth and whispered. Under the high temperature, the color of the shell surface changed slightly, and a wisp of green smoke began to emerge from the shell. Fidelia's eyes were fierce, and she looked in front of her. She saw Jill and the other two, as well as Li Ming, had arrived one after another, and the most important thing was a red robot. Get out first. After whispering angrily, Fidelia's red body retracted into the shell, and the shell slowly closed. Seeing that the shell was about to close, Li Ming in the distance narrowed his eyes slightly and whispered, "Flash." With a bang, Li Ming disappeared from the spot. When Li Ming appeared again, he had come close to the shell. At this time, there was only a small gap left in the shell. Li Ming immediately waved his hand. A metal capsule was thrown in directly, and the shell closed completely with a snap. At this time, Fidelia, who was inside, saw the metal capsule thrown in. What is this? Fidelia looked at it intently and saw the metal capsule flickering slightly, and the light became weaker and weaker. Fidelia opened her eyes wide and immediately shouted in shock, "No!" The voice was heartbreaking and came through the shell, and Li Ming outside heard it very clearly. He slapped the shell with his right hand, and green light flashed under his palm. More than a dozen vines surged out of the green light. The vines grew and entangled quickly like ropes, and in just a moment, the closed shell was tied up tightly. After doing this, Li Ming quickly retreated and flew far away. Paget, Gil and others looked at this operation and didn't understand why. They didn't notice that Li Ming threw a high explosive metal capsule in, but they also noticed Li Ming's ability to summon vines. Inside the huge shell, Fidelia frantically tried to open the shell. The surface of the shell flashed red. She tried desperately to open it, but under the restraint of the vines, no matter how hard the shell struggled, it could only open a tiny gap, and the vines would immediately tighten and continue to tighten the shell. Fidelia tried hard to break free, but at this time the light of the metal capsule was getting lower and lower, just like time was counting down. 5, 4, 3. No, open it quickly. This damn shell. Bang. A violent muffled sound came from it, and the whole shell also vibrated with a dong. Li Ming in the distance also smiled slightly and whispered, "The defense of this shell is really extraordinary." The whole shell was intact, but wisps of green smoke came out from the gap of the shell mouth little by little, and at the same time, red, white, and hot liquid continued to overflow from the gap. Although the shell was extremely hard and had strong defense, Fidelia inside had no defense at all. At this moment, the shell was lifeless and fell straight to the ground. Paget, Gil and others on the side looked at Li Ming in horror and couldn't believe that this guy with only a second level civilization in front of him was so powerful. These people knew very well that when Li Ming was chased by Rockbanner, they had already concluded that Li Ming would definitely die at the hands of Rockbanner, but they didn't expect Li Ming to come back alive. control 3 powerful robots at the same time, and now kill the half-orc Fidelia. This series of operations is beyond the reach of these people. At this time, Li Ming waved at the red robot, and the red robot flew to Li Ming's front, and then a white light flashed, turning into a red metal plate. Li Ming raised his right hand, and the metal plate slowly fell into Li Ming's palm. He clenched his palm, and put the metal plate away. The others just watched from a distance, without saying a word, with a look of horror on their faces, and their mouths were completely stunned. Li Ming rolled his eyes, and glanced at these people, and when these people received Li Ming's gaze, they immediately turned their surprise into a slight smile. Li Ming ignored it, raised his head, and looked at the sky. The giant red electric arc net was getting closer and closer, which made Li Ming frown. The other people also looked up, and their faces instantly became ugly, but they didn't seem to be too worried. Li Ming's eyes began to look at the red electric arc in the sky seriously. Under his wisdom eyes, the energy system of the electric arc had already formed in front of him. The 5 thickest electric arcs connected to the far distance of the Wufeng district. Through his wisdom eyes, Li Ming had discovered the structure of the red electric arc. 5 huge electric arcs condensed in the sky, and then divided into small electric arcs and dispersed around, forming a large electric arc net. If you want to destroy this electric arc, you have to start with the 5 huge electric arcs. Just as Li Ming was observing, Paget seemed to see Li Ming's intention and said, "The Thunder Annihilation Array is an advanced thunder array of dark technology. The 5 peaks in the Wufeng district are energy fields. The arcs released will condense into an electric grid in the sky. If you want to break the array, you have to destroy the 5 peaks." But, at this point, Paget suddenly paused, and then continued, "The surface of the 5 peaks has powerful electrical energy. It is impossible to get close to them. It is almost impossible to destroy them." What Paget said was true. The white arcs on the surface of the 5 peaks were indeed extremely powerful. The parked spacecraft were destroyed in an instant, and the nearby staff were directly wiped out. Li Ming paused and frowned slightly after hearing this. But Paget smiled again and said, "Although the Thunder Annihilation Array is powerful, it is not difficult to break it. As long as there is a spacecraft attacking from the outside and destroying the 5 peaks with high energy lasers, it will be fine. I have communicated with the headquarters of the Pumi civilization in advance. According to the time, we are almost here." Paget continued. Li Ming nodded slightly, and then he understood why Paget was not panicking at all. It turned out that reinforcement had already arrived. Seeing this, Jill flew a few inches closer, smiled slightly, and said, "When I heard you talk about the dark technology civilization earlier, I also notified the headquarters of the Dulang civilization in time. The headquarters attaches great importance to this, and will also send troops over. Maybe they have already arrived outside the Bernardo Parade Bay." Li Ming quickly turned his head to look at Jill. Under his wise eyes, what the other party said, and what he was thinking in his heart fully emerged, which made Li Ming feel relieved. Since there was no danger, Li Ming was completely relaxed at this moment. Jill's eyes changed, and he looked at Li Ming and smiled, saying, "Li Ming, aren't you going to join our Dulang civilization's 2nd level civilization world? When the round cake arrives, you can come with me to the Marcellus Galaxy cluster to report." "Oh." Li Ming immediately showed a look of surprise, and even felt a little surprised. Joining the 2nd level civilization world naturally means getting the recognition of this world, and then Li Ming can openly start his own path of advancement. I thought I would have to talk to the other party, but I didn't expect the other party to take the initiative to invite him. Li Ming smiled and was about to respond when Paget on the side suddenly glanced at Jill and said, "Jill, isn't it inappropriate for an advanced civilization like Li Ming to join your Dulang civilization? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 607 Education. With what Li Ming has done, it is no problem for him to become a Pumi civilization, merit position. This treatment is the same as the local civilization status of our Pumi civilization. This is the most appropriate, Paget said here, and his eyes turned and looked at Li Ming. Li Ming was also surprised to hear this. Paget actually invited him, and it was a merit position. Merit position is a level position of advanced civilization. Li Ming can find this from Jill's consciousness, because the second level civilization world itself excludes those who have advanced civilizations. Even if someone advances in, they are inferior outsiders. The second level civilization that grows locally is higher than those that have advanced to this level, but there are exceptions. Some who have made great contributions or have strong strength will be treated specially and given a higher status. Merit position is one of them, and it exists on the same level as the local civilization. Li Ming is happy to accept this. After all, Li Ming's original purpose was just to enter the second level civilization world. I didn't expect that there would be special treatment for merit positions. He turned his eyes and looked at Paget. There was something strange in his eyes. Seeing this, Jill also had a stern look in his eyes, and his expression suddenly became solemn. But when he looked at Li Ming again, he immediately laughed and said, "Paget, you misunderstood me. Since I took the initiative to invite Li Ming to join, how could I treat him unfairly? It is no exaggeration to say that in my mind, Li Ming should at least be a noble after entering the Dulang civilization." Jill continued, glancing at Paget while speaking. Paget's brows tightened when he heard this, and he opened his eyes wide, staring at Jill fiercely, and said sternly, "Jill, you." He wanted to say something, but before he opened his mouth, the ground in the distance suddenly boomed. A huge explosion occurred. After this sound, a boom sound suddenly rose in another direction, and then there were such violent explosions in other directions. The sound was so loud that it could be heard clearly, even if it was 100 miles away, and it was felt truly. As the explosion sounded, the red arc of light in the sky began to tremble and become unstable. At this time, Nuaya was surprised and said repeatedly, "It must be the reinforcement from the headquarters. We can leave here." The other people looked up at the sky and saw that after a tremor, the red arc's light instantly weakened, and the frequency of the arc's beating instantly decreased. After more than 10 seconds, the arc turned into starlight and dissipated in the air. The arc disappeared, and the sky suddenly became clear. At this time, two huge spaceships had slowly emerged. The two spaceships were huge. One was a black cube, which was the spaceship of the Dulang civilization, and the other was a silver disk, which was the Pumi civilization. As soon as the spaceship appeared, it came to the sky above the building complex, and then two blue beams of light shot out from the bottom of the spaceship. The beams of light disappeared in a flash, and after the beams of light, 4 or 5 aliens appeared and flew over here. Li Ming swept his eyes left and right and immediately distinguished that the two parties were from the Dulang civilization and the Pumi civilization, and both were second level civilizations. As these people approached, they cast strange eyes at Li Ming. After a disdainful glance, they saluted to Gil and Paget. Paget and Gil ignored them and turned to Li Ming. The two of them wanted to say something, but Li Ming raised his hand and said, "I think this is how it should be. I still have some personal matters to deal with. After I deal with these small matters, I will decide where to go. After all, I will enter the second level civilization." The two of them paused after hearing this, and Li Ming did not give them any chance to say anything more. He flew away directly. As soon as Li Ming left, Paget looked at Jill fiercely and said in a cold voice, "Jill, Li Ming is now in our Hydra Centauri supercluster. It is most appropriate for him to join our Pumi civilization. I advise you not to argue about this." Jill naturally showed an expression of not giving in at all, and replied, "Li Ming's home planet is still in this supercluster after all. Shouldn't he join our Dulang civilization?" The two of them refused to give in, and both wanted to win over Li Ming. Paget looked at Li Ming, who was going away, snorted, and said, "Okay, let's see who Li Ming will join in the end." Having said that, Paget turned around and left. Jill stood quietly and looked at each other. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Let's go." The two of them knew very well that their purpose was also very clear, which was to win over Li Ming. After all, Li Ming had too many things they needed. First of all, Li Ming has the intelligence of a big star, which is extremely important for curbing the orcs or attacking the orc civilization in the future. Secondly, Li Ming's amazing strength instantly recaptured the robots of the dark technology civilization. The second level civilization world is a huge watershed. The biggest enemy is naturally the dark technology civilization, and Li Ming just has such an ability. Incorporating it into his own civilization world is equivalent to gaining a powerful combat force, which is extremely important. At present, Li Ming did not agree or refuse, but Li Ming must enter the second level civilization world, so both sides are very concerned about how Li Ming will choose next. The personnel of the Pumi civilization and the Dulang civilization have withdrawn to the giant spaceship, and at this moment, Li Ming also came to the top of another spaceship. The spaceship where Li Ming is located above the square. It is a spaceship carrying the source body. Looking up at the sky, the two huge spaceships have turned around and are ready to leave. At this time, Li Ming pointed at the spaceship under him, and a green light shot out. The green light sank into the spaceship and disappeared directly. After more than 10 seconds, the spaceship made a buzzing sound and started. Then the top wall of the spaceship opened in parallel. Li Ming looked down and saw several small life-saving spaceships inside the hatch. There were two people standing on both sides of the spaceship, namely Tanjing and Biggs. Li Ming moved and entered the spaceship. The battle outside has subsided, and there is no danger now. I have set all the coordinates of this spaceship. It will fly directly to the Andromeda galaxy in this galaxy group, Li Ming said calmly. When they saw Li Ming again, Tanjing and Biggs were shocked and stared at Li Ming in a daze without saying a word. After saying this, Li Ming turned around and flew out of the spaceship directly, as if he was ready to leave. But before Li Ming left, Tanjing suddenly flew up and also came outside. Li Ming paused, glanced at the other party, and said coldly, "What? Is there anything else?" Tanjing's expression was still cold, but the look she gave Li Ming was particularly firm. After hesitating for a while, she said, "Once I have a goal, I will strive to pursue it, and will not give up until I achieve it." Li Ming smiled slightly after hearing this, and after looking the other party up and down, he said, "This is somewhat similar to your character of constant revenge. Well, it is naturally best to have a goal, but it must be realistic. Don't set the goal too high like before. In the end, not only will you fail, but you will also lose miserably. There may not always be someone like me who will lend you a hand at the critical moment. Good luck may not always be on your side," Li Ming said casually, but his tone was as if he was teaching a student. Tanjing's eyes were fixed on Li Ming, without blinking, as if staring at an object. "Next time we meet, I will definitely defeat you. If I defeat you, you will be mine," Tanjing said solemnly. Li Ming was startled by this, but soon he smiled softly and said, "It seems that what I said just now was in vain." Tanjing immediately replied, "No, this time, there is no failure." Li Ming shook his head slightly, smiled lightly, and turned away. Li Ming, who was flying in the air, was running straight into the distance. While flying, Li Ming's right hand flipped, and golden light flashed in his palm. Then a stingy bird emerged. This bird was what Hansaji left behind. This thing was like Hansaji's eyes, always watching Li Ming. Looking at the golden bird, Li Ming whispered, "Now it's time to deal with your business, Hansaji." Chapter 608, Unsatiable Coldness. In the starry sky of the universe, Li Ming was flying towards the Lawnland galaxy in a capsule spaceship. Burner Cruise Bay was already at the edge of the Lawnland galaxy, and it would only take a few teleports to reach it. On Li Ming's current console, the coordinates of a planet were displayed, the Hell Ice Star. According to the information Li Ming had obtained from Hans Ji before, the magic weapon of the Bihuang civilization, Gongyu Li Shuang Sword, was on this planet. Li Ming was still very interested in this weapon. After all, with the help of meteor, Li Ming's combat power had doubled and benefited a lot. This kind of rare and powerful weapon, Li Ming naturally did not recommend having more. The spaceship approached the target location little by little, but Li Ming did not know that in the starry sky not far from Li Ming, another capsule spaceship had already noticed Li Ming's existence. The appearance of this capsule spaceship was exactly the same as the one Li Ming was driving. At this time, in the main cabin of the spaceship, Boyles was concentrating on the console. Boyles was the station master of the planetary defense station of the Orc civilization on Big Star. Since the planetary defense system was destroyed by Li Ming, Boyles has been chasing Li Ming, but after a fierce battle on an asteroid, Li Ming's trace disappeared. Li Ming dropped a spaceship capsule before escaping. After getting rid of Li Ming's microworms, Boyles used the capsule spaceship dropped by Li Ming to continue chasing. Boyles speculated that Li Ming might have entered the Lawnland galaxy, but after searching for nothing, he was ready to return to Big Star. At this time, Boyles did not know what happened in Cruz Bay. Seeing the same capsule spaceship at this time, Boyles immediately cheered up again, looking at the operating table with a pair of eyes and whispering excitedly, "It's this kind of spaceship. Could it be that guy?" Whispering in his mouth, he raised his hand and clicked on the operating table, locking the position of Li Ming's spaceship. At this moment, Li Ming had not noticed the other party's movements and was still heading straight for the Hellice star. After a few flashes, a foggy planet appeared in front of Li Ming. The planet on the operating table was unusually bright. Although the planet was not big, its surface was foggy, like a white bead covered with fog. As he was watching, the surface of the operating table immediately made a beeping sound, and the alarm system was constantly sending out reminders. Li Ming understood immediately after seeing the information. He opened his mouth slightly and whispered, "The temperature of this planet is actually close to absolute zero." Li Ming said to himself in astonishment, "If absolute zero is reached, then everything will reach the lowest form of motion. Because any space must have energy and heat, and they are constantly converting each other without disappearing. Absolute zero will make everything still. Simply put, there is no energy on this planet. No energy can be formed in this environment." Seeing this, Li Ming immediately changed direction, and changed the direction and purpose of his advance. "What a joke on the universe. If I go in, I will definitely die," Li Ming blurted out as he looked at the Hellice star in front of him. As Li Ming said, this planet will be one of the absolute forbidden areas. Those who enter will never return. Of course, there may be some special beings that can enter, but they are definitely very rare, and Li Ming is naturally not that rare life. Magic weapons are naturally precious and rare, but life is the most important and the root of everything. Before, I knew that this planet was dangerous, but Li Ming never thought it would be so dangerous. If that's the case, then I can only say that I have no chance to use this magic weapon. The spaceship did not teleport, but flew slowly, but it was also moving away from the planet little by little. Now Li Ming's thoughts have changed a little bit. Li Ming already has the artifact Niteng and the magic weapon Kanjiui, and he has not yet fully mastered these two weapons. Even if he gives up the magic weapon in front of him, there is no loss. Looking at the console, Li Ming sighed and whispered, "When the Li Shuang sword was still on Thurston, the Bihuang civilization was coveted by other civilizations. Now, the Li Shuang sword has fallen into this Hellice star, and no one cares about it. Although I can't get this magic weapon, I still have to do what I promised Hansuji." While speaking, Li Ming looked at the golden badge on his shoulder, then raised his hand and locked another position on the console. Thurston, Hansuji's home planet. After determining the target, the spacecraft re-entered the transmission system. At this moment, in another distant starry sky, a spacecraft was flying quickly. This spacecraft was flying in a V-shape. Two aliens in the main cabin were whispering in front of the console. These two people were the Blood Hunter and another alien. The alien was slender and thin, with short light yellow hair, black and grey armor, and more than 1 meter tall, like a little girl. His pretty face was somewhat similar to that of a human, but his long ears were exactly the same as those of the Blood Hunter. "Delaney, how is Lockabana's injury?" The Blood Hunter turned his eyes and glanced at Delaney beside him. Delaney's face was gloomy, and she replied, "It is impossible to return to the original state, but, after my modification, he can become stronger." He with a stiff laugh and a cold face, like a robot. Blood Hunter then turned his gaze back to the operating table and whispered, "According to the boss's original intention, it was to cooperate with Rockbana's plan, to promote the war between the Orcs and the Pumi civilization, and provide an opportunity for the invasion of our dark technology civilization. Now this plan has failed, so we can only implement plan B." Delaney turned her eyes and looked back at Blood Hunter. After a little thought, she said, "The Eye of the Center of the Earth plan." Blood Hunter nodded slightly, staring at the operating table, and said, "According to our calculations, The eye of the center of the earth that the Orc civilization is looking forward to is about to open, but the location and place of the opening are still unknown. So, at this time we must play to our strengths and find the location of the eye of the center of the earth in advance. Both the Orcs and the Pumi civilization need to know the location of the eye of the center of the earth in advance, so whether they can start a war between them, this is the last chance. Bloodhunter's expression was particularly serious, and he was extremely serious when talking about the final plan. Delaney naturally saw it, but she had a different expression on her face. After hesitating for a while, she said, "So, the participants in this plan. There are only 3 of us." As soon as Delaney finished speaking, Bloodhunter returned firmly. At the same time, he lightly tapped on the operating table and said, "Using the least number of people to create the greatest value of benefits. This has always been the most important point of view of our dark technology civilization. After Okbana recovers, I will be responsible for the Orcs, and the Pumi civilization will be handed over to you." Bloodhunter continued. Delaney immediately understood what Bloodhunter meant, nodded slightly, and didn't say anything more. At the same time, Li Ming had teleported a long distance in the Lawnland galaxy, but Li Ming did not directly enter the Thurston star, but wandered around the periphery of the large galaxy. In the main cabin, Li Ming looked at the control panel, frowned, and whispered, "This spaceship behind me has been following me. Is there any intention?" The spaceship that Li Ming did not notice at first has now attracted Li Ming's attention. Since Li Ming entered the Lawnland galaxy, this spaceship has been following behind. This strange phenomenon naturally attracted Li Ming's attention, and at the same time, made Li Ming more vigilant. How could Li Ming not be careful when being followed by such a guy? Touching his chin with his right hand, Li Ming began to ponder. After thinking for a while, Li Ming raised his hand and locked another position. There is a desolate planet in the outermost part of the star system, where Thurston star is located, Dam star. This planet is far away from the star, and the surface temperature is extremely low and gray-black. There is no life or other creatures on this planet. Although this planet and Thurston star are in the same star system, this planet is like Uranus in the solar system, and belongs to a remote planet in the star system. Li Ming chose this place to see if the spaceship behind him is coming for him. Chapter 609 Do you think you can kill me? Exclamation mark. After a few flashes, Li Ming's spaceship arrived in the space of Dam star, but Li Ming did not enter immediately, but stayed briefly in the space of the planet. At this time, Li Ming in the main cabin was concentrating on the operating table. The spaceship that had been following Li Ming actually followed him. Damn, it actually came for me. Li Ming gritted his teeth in anger. He pointed his finger again, and the spaceship disappeared from the spot with a hum. At this time, the spaceship that had been following Li Ming had also arrived in the space of Dam star. Boyles looked at the operating table angrily, and a sinister smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Are you hiding from me on purpose? It seems it's him." A strange and ferocious smile immediately appeared on his face, and then he pointed his finger, and the spaceship also entered the planet with a hum. The surface of the desolate planet was full of potholes, as if it had experienced countless collisions. Li Ming's figure had already emerged on the undulating rock layer. He looked up at the spaceship he had just parked, raised his hand and pointed, and the spaceship turned into a metal capsule and fell back into Li Ming's hand. Li Ming continued to look at the sky. Suddenly, a blue light flashed under his feet. Then his body slowly descended. The seemingly hard surface of the planet was as soft as the surface of water. Li Ming's body also slowly sank into it and disappeared. As soon as Li Ming disappeared, there was a muffled bang in the air here. A spaceship had landed. In the main cabin of the spaceship, Boyle stared at the operating table in a daze, his eyes rolling around, and whispered, "What's going on? The person is gone. Impossible. The information location of the spaceship is here." Boyles concentrated on himself and began to be confused. Just as Boyles was thinking, the ground directly below the spaceship suddenly banged. There was a loud noise, like a bomb exploding on the surface, rubble flying, dust and smoke rising. At the same time as the sound was made, a rock arm flew out from the ground. The rock arm was more than 10 meters long and wide, huge, as if a stone pillar had sprung out from the surface. At the top of the rock arm was a huge rock fist, which flew out into the sky and hit the bottom of the spaceship. Boom. A loud bang was heard, and the originally fragile capsule spaceship was smashed into a big hole by the rock fist. The sound of explosion was heard immediately, and flames were everywhere. The huge fist entered the spaceship and then opened, driving the spaceship to slam to the ground, just like a palm with a fist slapping the ground horizontally. Boom. Another loud bang was heard, and flames were everywhere. The entire spaceship exploded instantly, and turned into a ball of fire. At this moment, a figure leaped up in the flames. This figure came to the middle of the rock arm with just a jump, and while falling, he punched out fiercely. Bang! The rock arm broke directly. The person who fell was Boyles, with his feet on the ruins of rubble, his eyes looking around blindly, and a dull sound came out of his mouth. That seemed to be a smile. "Come out. I know you are here," Boyles said viciously with a slight smile on his lips. At this time, on the top of a huge rock in the distance, a half-crouching figure slowly emerged, as if floating from the water. This person was naturally Li Ming, but as soon as Li Ming appeared, he looked at Boyles not far away with a fierce look, and whispered, "The haunted guy." Seeing Li Ming again at this time, Boyles immediately showed joy, and laughed out loud ha ha ha, saying, "Finally, I found you." As soon as this sound came out, Boyles jumped excitedly, swung his fist and hit Li Ming directly. Li Ming moved and disappeared from the spot. Boom. The rock turned into pieces directly, and Li Ming had jumped to a distant place. "This time, I won't let you escape easily." As he said this, Boyle's body surface was slightly lit with white light. Seeing that the other party was going to use some powerful tricks again, Li Ming suddenly raised his hand and said, "Wait." Boyles paused in surprise. Li Ming took a deep breath, stared at the other person for 2 seconds, and said, "Brother, stop here. Don't follow me anymore. Go back to your big star. I'll go where I should go, okay?" Boyle's expression twitched a few times. His hands clenched into fists, and he said, "The planetary defense system, that is a matter of life and death for a civilization, a race, and a planet. If you destroy it, it means that all life on this planet will face destruction. As the planetary defense system, I will bear all the responsibilities, but, before that, I must kill you." As he said this, Boyles flew up, and came to Li Ming in a flash. Li Ming's eyes widened a little, and he jumped to avoid the attack, and jumped onto a boulder more than 10 meters high. "Fuck you. I destroyed your defense system just to survive. You can just symbolically chase me for a few days. Do you really think you can kill me?" Li Ming shouted angrily. As soon as this sentence came out, Boyles seemed to be completely enraged. The white flames on his body suddenly rose several meters high. Sharp teeth were revealed under his trembling lips. His face under the energy flames was slightly fluctuating, as if a strong wind was blowing the skin on his face. His lips opened slightly, and he said word by word, "You said what?" Li Ming was also furious at this time. After seeing the other party's powerful energy vision, his body made a muffled bang sound, and the 3-color energy flames of blue, green, and blue were released from Li Ming's body. His eyes slowly widened a little, and a purple light flashed in his eyeballs. A purple triangle pattern had appeared. The palm of his right hand tightly grasped a purple crystal block, and at this moment, the crystal block directly turned into a purple energy breath, and came to Li Ming's body. I said, "You can't kill me at all." As soon as the voice fell, the rock under Li Ming's feet suddenly banged and cracked, which was formed under the shock of the powerful energy breath. At this time, Boyle's figure slowly flew up, and at the same time, his right fist was raised little by little. A huge amount of white energy condensed on the surface of his fist in a phantom state, and Li Ming also made the same move, looking like he was determined to fight to the end. Before the energy auras of the two came into contact, the surrounding sky was already buzzing, and the ground was also making a squeaking sound. "Go to hell," Boyles shouted, blood already bursting out of his wide open eyes, and his right fist went straight to Li Ming. Li Ming was naturally not to be outdone, and he also raised his right fist, and went straight to meet him, shouting, "Fuck you." Boyle's fist was wrapped in a white light body the size of a basketball. This energy sphere seemed small, but the energy aura was heavy, and as his arm was swung, a huge phantom also rose from the ground. The phantom was like a huge human skeleton, all white, and it only sprang out from the ground as the fist was swung. The entire skeleton was in a phantom state, because Boyles was only a few dozen meters above the ground, so that the skeleton only exposed the upper half of the body. The phantom skeleton cooperated with Boyles' movements, and swung his white bone fist directly to smash Li Ming. Li Ming was not weak either. The three-color energy body condensed into a phantom of a giant dragon, but it was only the head of the phantom dragon, which was composed of blue, green, and blue. The size of the phantom dragon was no less than that of the white bone phantom. From a distance, it looked like a white bone giant punching a dragon with its mouth wide open. Boom. The two collided violently, and the collision of powerful energies immediately caused light to radiate. The light quickly spread on the surface of the planet. Even from the perspective of the universe, one could clearly see the light on the surface of the planet, as if a lamp was lit on the surface of the planet. The light flashed and disappeared, and a huge shock wave spread out. This magnificent scene could only be seen clearly from the macroscopic perspective of the universe. From space, one could clearly see that the surface of the planet was already blurred, as if the area had been completely detonated. Chapter 610 Natural Growth, Bone. Whoosh, the wind whistled past, the dust and smoke had long since calmed down, and a huge stone pit had appeared on the surface of Damstar. Standing in the air in the middle of the pit and looking around, one could not see the edge of the pit at all. But from the perspective of space, one could clearly see this huge pit, as if it had just been hit by an asteroid. The pit was calm, as if nothing had ever happened. A moment later, a clattering sound was heard, and a pile of scattered stones rolled down from the bottom of the pit. After a few seconds, a muffled bang sound was heard, and a white bone arm broke out of the ground. Immediately afterwards, there was another bang sound, and this time it was a relatively complete arm. The two arms pressed the ground hard, and a human upper body rose from the ground. It was Boyles. At this moment, half of Boyles' body was bones, and the other half was flesh. After the upper body was exposed, the body exerted force, and the whole body stood up completely from the ground. At this moment, the head was half bone and half flesh, but there was no trace of blood. The head turned gently, and the eyeballs and eye sockets of the skull were checked. In the quiet pit, except for the occasional sound of wind, there was nothing unusual. Heh heh. Boyles then laughed in a low voice, and the laughter became louder and louder, and finally turned into a loud laughter of ha 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 ha. After the laughter ended, Boyles whispered, "You still say I can't kill you?" After saying this, Boyles' face was already full of excitement and satisfaction. But at this moment, the ground in the distance suddenly made a squeaking sound, and cracks appeared one after another. The sound was not loud, and the cracks were very weak, but this weak sound immediately attracted Boyles' attention. Boyles' expression immediately solidified. His expression was tense, and his eyes stared straight at that place. The cracked ground became more and more bulging, slowly rising, as if something was about to come out of it. The more this happened, the more Boyles looked at it, and his eyes widened a little. With a muffled sound of bang, the rock broke apart and scattered around, and a white color appeared inside, like a smooth white cloth. The white object slowly turned, and a figure emerged. It was Li Ming. Li Ming stood up from it, and the white cloth object moved away from the surface of his body little by little, and returned to Li Ming's back. It was Li Ming's Shanhei Hingayan Shang cloak. The shield just now was Li Ming's Shanhei Hingayan shield, which was an ability that Li Ming developed on the Shanhei Hingayan Shang cloak after entering the second level civilization. Under the protection of the Zingayan shield, Li Ming's body had no scars, only his right hand was damaged and dripping blood. In the confrontation attack just now, although the Zingayan shield protected the body, the right hand was not retracted in time, which caused the damage. However, this injury was naturally nothing to Li Ming. The green light flashed, and his right hand was already wrapped in a green halo. It was the energy that was repairing the wound. At this time, Li Ming's expression was extremely angry. He looked at the other party coldly. Suddenly, he shouted and said sternly, "Come on, kill me." As he said so, Li Ming took out a Zingayan pill and put it directly into his mouth. With a fierce expression, he chewed it directly, just like eating snacks. The expression of chewing was also a bit ferocious, and he looked at the other party fiercely. Boyles began to calm down gradually at this moment. He did not respond to Li Ming, but just stood there motionless, but his eyes did not leave Li Ming at all. Both sides knew that the attack just now had used up almost all the energy in their bodies, so at the moment, it was not suitable for both of them to fight. Li Ming hurriedly took the Xingyan pill, and he could not wait for the Xingyan pill to be absorbed in his body bit by bit, so he chewed and ate it directly. Of course, Li Ming frowned slightly when he looked at Boils. After such a huge energy consumption just now, Boils did not take any pills, but just stood there motionless. Li Ming opened his eyes slightly, and some abnormal phenomena were discovered under his wisdom. There was a layer of white halo outside Boils' body, which was gradually approaching his body. To be precise, Boils was absorbing natural energy. Seeing this, Li Ming frowned slightly, and thought to himself, no wonder this guy's energy is so strong. He actually uses natural energy, and the speed of absorption. Li Ming was surprised. As Li Ming saw, Boils' body was automatically absorbing natural energy, and the speed of absorption was extraordinary. After the natural energy entered his body, the bones began to grow automatically. Li Ming's wisdom eyes saw all these very carefully, and at the same time he had some understanding of Boils' special physique. The bones continued to grow under the nourishment of natural energy, but what grew out was not completely white bones, but a kind of tissue with a strange structure, similar to cartilage. In other words, those things that looked like flesh on the surface were actually bones, just cartilage, and the bones exposed now were the hardest bones inside. As a half-orc, Boils obviously inherited extremely rare animal genes. The reason why half-orcs are so powerful is that they collect civilized creatures with strong genes and non-civilized creatures with special genes. The combination of the two is naturally extraordinary. It's impossible to defeat the opponent if we continue to consume it. Now, either try to kill this person, or just run away, Li Ming said to himself. Although Boils' speed of absorbing natural energy is very fast, it is still much slower than the recovery of elixirs. Li Ming stared at the opponent intently, and with a wave of his right hand, a light blade appeared from his hand. If you don't come to kill me, then I will do it. Li Ming's eyes flashed with cold light, and he waved the light blade and pressed directly over. Seeing that Li Ming really launched an attack, Boils was also slightly startled and became more vigilant. Instant light. As soon as the two words came out, Li Ming's body, which was originally running, suddenly disappeared. Cut. The sound came into his ears, and the light blade also chopped down together with the sound. Bang. A muffled sound was heard, and a bone suddenly grew out from behind Boils. This bone successfully blocked Li Ming's light blade. As the muffled sound was heard, Li Ming was also bounced away. MD, this guy's defense ability is better than expected, worthy of being a 2.4 level civilization. Whispering in his heart, Li Ming has begun to look at the opponent again. Now Li Ming certainly wants to kill the opponent directly, so that Li Ming will be free from the trouble of being chased by the opponent in the future, but the reality is obviously unlikely. Li Ming's energy is recovering, and the opponent's energy is also recovering, and Li Ming's attack has almost no advantage. In the last battle, Li Ming also used netting, but still couldn't kill the opponent, which made Li Ming waver in the idea of killing the opponent, and at the same time his desire to escape became stronger and stronger. At this time, Li Ming's strength is not good, so there is no need to rush to fight to the death. Thinking of this, Li Ming's mouth corners slightly raised, and he said, "It seems that it will take some time for your energy to recover, and this time is the best time for me to kill you." As he said this, Li Ming clenched the light blade in his hand, and a blue halo flashed on his body. Hearing Li Ming's words, Boils also looked serious, staring at Li Ming with his eyes, and said, "Many opponents have said this before. This is indeed the best time to defeat me, but I can still stand in front of you. You should understand what the final result of those guys was before. Moreover, the people I decide to kill will never escape from my hands, and you will not be an exception." Boils said very seriously at this moment, and his mental power was also highly concentrated. He slowly opened his hands and took a fighting posture and continued, "As a second level civilization, you can fight to this point. You are definitely the strongest second level civilization in my cognition, no one else. Come on, Show your strongest strength, let me feel your most terrifying damage, and see if my bones are enough to defend. Come on. Boyle suddenly became high-spirited and looked solemn. Chapter 611. Thurston Planet. Li Ming was naturally ready for the battle. He slowly raised the lightsaber in his right hand and whispered, "This strike will definitely make you feel the taste of death." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Ming's figure suddenly flew away. Light blade sword formation. Li Ming waved his right hand, and white light flashed around him. One by one, light blades suddenly appeared. The light blades lit up in the air nearby like lampposts. The positions of these light blades were not fixed or regular, but they surrounded Boyle's densely. Boyle's eyes turned left and right, looking at these light blades. When he looked straight, he saw that Li Ming was already flying towards him. His hands slammed together violently. One hand was pure white bones, and the other hand was with flesh. The white light on the surface of the body flickered slightly. When advanced civilizations use the energy in their bodies, they do not need any action assistance, as long as they control it with their mental consciousness. However, as the energy in the body decreases, if they want to concentrate the remaining little energy, they still need action to help concentrate their minds. That's why Boyle slapped his hands together. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and white bones suddenly burst out from Boyle's body surface. The bones popped out from Boyle's body, making Boyle's look like a hedgehog. The surrounding light blades shot out instantly. Li Ming narrowed his eyes and saw the right opportunity. The light blade in his hand also stabbed straight at Boyle's head. The light blades around were covering attacks, while Li Ming was looking for the opponent's weak defense loopholes, trying to kill the enemy with one blow. The sound of bang 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 was endless. The light blades were gradually blocked by the protruding bone spurs, and Boyle's eyes widened a little, locking on Li Ming's position. The attack of the light blades was completely blocked by the white bones, just like raindrops hitting the body, only emitting slight fluctuations, and had no effect on Boyle's, and Boyle's eyes were already fixed on Li Ming's position. This level of attack is too naive. With a force on his feet, his figure disappeared on the spot. Seeing that Li Ming's blade was about to pierce the opponent's head, Li Ming's body suddenly stiffened. Boyle's was one step ahead of Li Ming and attacked first. The white bone palm of his right hand turned into a bone spur and pierced Li Ming's abdomen. "When did you start using this inferior attack method?" Boyle's whispered, looking at Li Ming coldly with his one eye. Li Ming, who was hit, did not change his expression at all. Instead, he looked calm. He turned his eyes slightly to the side, looked at the opponent, and whispered, "Look up at the sky." Boyle's paused, frowned slightly, and looked sideways at the sky. He saw a capsule spaceship in the sky. Huh. Boyle was startled, looking up at the sky, then at Li Ming in front of him, thinking constantly in his mind, while Li Ming continued to say, "This is my last blow. I wish you good luck, Boyle." As soon as the voice fell, Li Ming's flesh pierced by Boyle's bones suddenly flashed, and rays of light shot out from it. Boyle saw this, and gritted his teeth tightly, but it was too late. Boom. After the light, a violent explosion occurred immediately, and smoke and dust flew in an area of hundreds of meters, and gravel flew across. Li Ming in the high-altitude spacecraft stood quietly in front of the operating table, watching the explosion scene below, raised his hand, and locked the coordinates for transmission. Leaving Dam Star, Li Ming went straight to Thurston Star. After locking the position, he took out a Zingian pill, and took it directly. Because in the same star system, the capsule spacecraft of this second-level civilization is also relatively advanced, and it arrived at the space of Thurston Star in a few flashes. At this time, the Thurston planet was completely displayed in front of Li Ming. He looked around, and turned his right hand. A golden bad appeared on Li Ming's palm. "Tell me the specific location," Li Ming whispered. The golden bird flapped its wings and flew to the surface of Thurston planet on the operating table. Its pointed beak lightly touched the water, and circles of ripples spread out from the surface of the planet. It was the most specific location on the surface of the planet. Li Ming followed and confirmed this location. The spaceship trembled slightly and began to transmit. Thurston planet, the birthplace of Bihuang civilization and the home planet of Hansji, is mainly land-based, with a small number of rivers, rich energy minerals, and lush vegetation. The spaceship flashed and disappeared, and when it reappeared, it was already above the barren mountain. The barren mountain was full of jungle vegetation, and there was no trace of life, showing desolation. After Li Ming glanced casually from the operating table, he lightly touched it and turned to walk out. A blue light flashed, and Li Ming's figure came out of the spaceship, standing above the jungle and looking around. After a moment, the golden bird on Li Ming's shoulder suddenly flapped its wings and flew downwards. The golden bird's action startled Li Ming slightly, and his eyes narrowed slightly. His wisdom ability had been activated. Li Ming immediately noticed something strange in the direction the golden bird flew. He saw a figure slowly flying up from the underground jungle. The golden bird circled and slowly landed on the other person's shoulder. Li Ming looked at this person and smiled slightly. The person who flew out was Han Siji. Han Siji glanced at the golden bird that returned to his side, then turned his eyes to look at Li Ming and said, "Hide your spaceship and follow me." Li Ming did not reply, but looked back at the spaceship behind him, raised his right hand, and saw a blue light flashing. The spaceship suddenly flashed with light, turned into a metal capsule and slowly fell down. Li Ming grabbed the capsule, and then looked at Han Siji again. He moved his body and flew over. Seeing Li Ming put away the spaceship, Han Siji finally felt relieved. After checking the surrounding environment, he turned around and flew back to the depths of the jungle. Li Ming followed closely behind without saying a word. Under Han Siji's leadership, they passed through a jungle and came to an ancient tree. The ancient tree was no different from other trees, but this was only on the surface. If you look closely with your wisdom eyes, you will immediately find something unusual. This ancient tree, from the root to the diameter and the top of the branches, is full of strange energy. Li Ming has never seen this kind of energy, but he can guess that this should be a kind of special energy. When he came to the ancient tree, Han Siji stopped, raised one hand, and tapped the ancient tree gently. Green light flashed, and a vortex portal appeared. Li Ming frowned, his wisdom eyes focused, and his face showed a bit of surprise. The energy of the portal can be ordinary energy, but it requires special materials to operate the energy and make the energy have the ability to transmit. However, the ancient tree in front of him is completely different. Not only is the energy weird, but it can also create a portal. He looked around with his eyes full of curiosity. Han Siji looked back at Li Ming and walked in directly. Li Ming did not hesitate and followed him in. Although Han Siji was a 2.3 level civilization, it was in the same range as Li Ming's second level civilization. Although Li Ming's civilization level was not high, his strength was already the strongest in the same range. All of his thoughts were under Li Ming's control. There was a flash of light, and when he came out again, he was already on a round platform. It was dark here. It was like a cave. The space was round, and there was another portal in front. Han Siji walked over first, raised his hand and clicked, just like using a key, to open the lock of the portal. Li Ming looked carefully with his eyes. After all, Li Ming was very familiar with the teleportation energy. After watching Han Siji enter, Li Ming followed. Through this portal, there is a straight downward passage, 2 meters high and wide, with steps one by one, and spherical decorations hanging on both sides of the wall. This decoration not only releases energy continuously, but also releases this faint light, illuminating the entire passage. Following each other, they continued to walk down the stairs. This was the same all the way. After walking for a while, they finally reached the bottom. A separate small room, square in shape, with 3 protruding patterns on the 3 walls of the room. The patterns were like sculptures, in the middle of the wall. Chapter 612 Precious Things. The pattern protruding from the wall was the face of some kind of beast, and it was lifelike, as if 3 beasts were about to get out of the wall. Han Siji came to the wall in the middle, and raised his hand to gently touch the forehead of the beast. With a humming sound, the beast head lightened slightly, and moved a few times, as if the beast in the wall was a living thing. Li Ming's eyes widened a little at this time, and he frowned slightly as he looked at the goods on the wall. In Li Ming's cognition, this beast head door is a kind of portal, which has great transmission restrictions and strong defense capabilities. It is a more advanced type of portal, and its own ability is far higher than that of ordinary portals. The beast head looked at Han Siji with his eyes, and then looked at Li Ming behind him. After hesitating for a while, his expression tightened, and suddenly a bright light flashed, and the whole wall gradually turned into nothingness and disappeared. Hans Ji then continued to walk inside. Li Ming followed closely behind him. As soon as the two entered, the stone door wall behind them automatically solidified and returned to the appearance of a wall. With a glance in front of him, he had come to a large room. In the middle of the room was a circular operating table, 5 meters long and wide, with blue light flashing on it, showing all the environment of the Thurston planet. Sculptures of different sizes were placed around the room. These sculptures were all stone entities, all beasts that Li Ming had never seen before, and looked extremely strange. Hans Ji walked towards the operating table and said, "This is the most confidential place of our Bihang civilization. I bring you in, because I place all my hopes for the restoration of civilization on you." Li Ming glanced around, slowly came to the operating table, and said, "I will do what I promised you." As he spoke, Li Ming had already come close to the operating table. At this time, Hans Ji continued, "The situation on Thurston is quite complicated now. There are 3 forces in total, namely the Hydraxi civilization from the Loneland Galaxy, the Jingpo civilization, and the Luoba Star Plunder Group." Li Ming kept looking at the console, then raised his hand and a beam of green light shot in. The green light was Li Ming's consciousness. Once he entered the console, a lot of information inside was stored in Li Ming's mind. The console recorded in detail the positions, combat power, and relationships between the 3 forces. This information and intelligence was naturally very important to Li Ming. The green light moved in the console, just like flying on the surface of Thurston. The actual terrain and environment entered Li Ming's mind in the form of pictures. These 3 forces controlled 3 mining areas respectively, mainly mining energy ores. Of course, the slaves responsible for mining ores were all people from the original Bihang civilization, just like a colony. But the relationship between the 3 forces was somewhat different. The relationship between the Jingpo civilization and the Luoba Star Plunder Group was relatively close, and the 2 were in a cooperative relationship. This was also inseparable from the geographical location. The Jingpo civilization is a civilization in the Hydra Galaxy cluster. The large galaxy it belongs to is also on the edge of the Hydra Galaxy cluster, close to Centaurus, and the Loneland Galaxy is also located on the edge of the Centaurus Galaxy cluster. The distance between the 2 directly affects the situation of mutual invasion. The Luoba Star Plunder Group also belongs to the Hydra Galaxy cluster, so the relationship between the 2 is relatively close. But the purposes of the 2 are completely different. The Luoba Star Plunder Group is only for energy ore, and it is also one of the forces that invaded Thurston Star that year. The Jingpo civilization is different. The Jingpo civilization occupies this position just to protect the base of the Loneland Galaxy. The enemy of the Jingpo civilization is the Orc civilization, but it does not have the strength to fight head-on, so it set up a secret base in Loneland, and then used the ore energy collected on Thurston Star to supply the needs of the secret base. This base will launch harassment on the Orc civilization from time to time, and at the same time, it is also responsible for monitoring the movements of the Orc civilization. After all, the Jingpo civilization is a long-term victim of the Orc civilization, so it is crucial to monitor the movements of the enemy. As for the Hydraxi civilization, it is relatively ordinary. It is one of the civilizations in the Loneland Galaxy. It originally came to Thurston Star under the banner of assisting the Bihang civilization, but eventually became a predator and took advantage of the situation. Li Ming had complete control over the 3 forces through the operating table. With the corners of his mouth slightly raised, he said, "It's not difficult to expel these 3 forces from this planet. I can do it in 1 day." Li Ming said confidently, withdrew his consciousness from the operating table, looked at Hans Ji, and continued, "If I help you take back the Thurston Star, you and I will owe each other nothing. From then on, you can only rely on yourself." Hans Ji heard this, but he looked disapproving. There seemed to be something else in his hesitant eyes. After a moment, he said, "Aren't you helping me to restore the Bihang civilization?" Li Ming was startled when he heard this, and then he chuckled. After a slight sigh, he said, "The reason I agreed to you was entirely for that magic weapon, the Lishang sword. But I can't set foot on the Hell Ice Star. Since I can't get the Lishang sword, I can only help you here. Besides, this is already the best I can do." Li Ming continued, looking like he was ready to leave. Hansuji looked worried when he saw this. He looked at Li Ming and said, "What's the point if you just eliminate the invaders from Thurston? They will definitely send people to retaliate again. By that time, I'm afraid the entire Bihang civilization will not even be qualified to be enslaved and will be completely extinct." Han Siji was even a little angry when he spoke, but Li Ming just listened with a calm expression on his face. Li Ming was very clear about the current situation of Bihang civilization. It was not easy to completely save this civilization. The situation here was more complicated than Li Ming expected. Although Jingpo civilization had been brooding over the plunder of the Orc civilization and intended to take revenge, the strength of this civilization was not weak. After all, it was a silicon-based life form. If its interests were touched, Li Ming would naturally think twice before acting. At this time, Li Ming would not make enemies. Of course, no matter how powerful the Jingpo civilization was, it did not belong to the second-level civilization world, so if they really wanted to do something to it, Li Ming would not be worried. In addition, there was the Luoba Star Plunder Group. The Star Plunder Group's style of doing things was often to put interests first, so Li Ming naturally had to act cautiously. It is not difficult to solve it completely, but it will undoubtedly take a lot of time, which is not in Li Ming's own interests, so it is not in Li Ming's consideration. Now Li Ming just wants to hastily solve the matter on Thurston Star, and then enter the world of level 2 civilization. With this idea, Li Ming will not listen to anything Han Siji says. "Okay, I will help you deal with this matter, and I will also fulfill my promise to you. You don't have to say anything more," Li Ming said coldly, took a deep breath, turned around and prepared to leave directly. "Wait." Han Siji suddenly shouted and stopped Li Ming. Li Ming paused when he heard the voice, and his footsteps stopped in place. Seeing Li Ming stop, Han Siji did not say anything immediately, but hesitated in place, as if he wanted to say something but stopped. After thinking for a moment, Han Siji finally raised his hand and said, "The Bihang civilization has another precious and rare thing. If you can help me, I'm willing to give it to you." "Oh." Li Ming suddenly became interested and turned to look at the other party. Han Siji still looked hesitant, as if he was undecided, but after a few seconds of hesitation, Han Siji gritted his teeth and turned to a sculpture not far behind him. He raised his hand and tapped the sculpture gently. Green light flashed, and the surface of the sculpture flashed with light. The whole stone statue seemed to be resurrected suddenly, and its body moved slightly twice. A pair of stone eyes opened and looked at Han Siji in front of him. Suddenly, his mouth opened, and white light flashed in his mouth, and a scroll was spit out. Han Siji raised his hand, and took the scroll in his hand. He lowered his head slightly, looked at the object in his hand, and then turned to look at Li Ming. "This thing, like the magic weapon, is the most precious object of our Bihang civilization. Although it may not be useful to you, it is definitely a rare thing. If you can restore Bihang civilization, I'm willing to give it to you." Han Siji then said. Chapter 613, Spaceship Capture. Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, looking at Han Siji, then at the scroll in his hand, and finally smiled and said, "Then, let me take a look first to see what the precious item is." Han Siji looked solemn, and after looking at the item in his hand again, he raised his hand and threw the scroll over. Li Ming reached out and grabbed it, and the scroll fell into his palm. Then he shook his arm downward, and the scroll was opened. The scroll was not big, 2 feet long, and it was covered with dense characters. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly and began to watch it intently. While Li Ming was watching, Han Siji continued, "As I said, this thing may not be useful to you, but its value is immeasurable." His words were full of confidence, and the expression on his face revealed his cherishment of this item. Li Ming had already focused on those characters with his whole body. He just glanced at them for a few seconds, and his expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened a little, his expression suddenly stiffened, and he clenched his right hand and put the item away. A pair of eyes stared at Han Siji, his mouth opened slightly, and he said, "Leave the revival of Bihang civilization to me." Han Siji seemed to have expected Li Ming to agree. After nodding slightly, he said, "I knew you wouldn't refuse. For this reason, I have made 2 plans for you. As long as you follow this plan, Bihang civilization will definitely not be invaded by foreign enemies within 100 years. Li Ming clenched his right hand, and a blue light flashed. The scroll was collected by Li Ming. Li Ming raised his eyes slightly, looked at Han Siji, and said, "Then tell me." Han Siji took 2 steps forward to the operating table and said, "The first plan is to take the initiative. There are actually only 2 real threats to the Bihang civilization. One is the Luoba Star plundering group, and the other is the Jingpo civilization. We should go to their door in person and crush them with our strength, so that they will give up. In this way, the Bihang civilization will naturally be out of trouble. The second plan is to wait and see on Thurston Star. As long as we eliminate their forces on Thurston Star, these 2 forces will inevitably send new personnel. We will eliminate one as soon as they come. Naturally, the other party will not easily provoke our Bihang civilization." Li Ming nodded slightly after listening, but shook his head slightly. Han Siji was also startled, with a puzzled look on his face, and asked, "Why? You think these 2 plans are not appropriate?" Li Ming smiled slightly and said, "Using fighting to solve this problem is still a bit inappropriate. I just happen to have a better way." Han Siji paused after hearing this, looked back and forth at Li Ming, hesitated for a while, and asked, "Is there a better way?" Li Ming nodded gently and said, "Whether it is the Jingpo civilization or the Luoba Star plunder group, they are all under the jurisdiction of the second level civilization world. I can enter the second level civilization world and say hello directly, and these problems will no longer exist." Ah. Han Siji opened his eyes wide and stared at Li Ming for a long time without responding. Li Ming smiled and said, "Pumi civilization and Dulang civilization are both trying their best to invite me to join the second level civilization world. Do you think this is safer?" Han Siji fell into deep thought after hearing this, looking at the operating table and Li Ming for a while, thinking about something and worrying about something. Li Ming knew the other person's thoughts. Seeing his thoughts, Li Ming immediately asked, "What? Don't you believe me?" Han Siji glanced back at Li Ming, shook his head and said, "No, it's just, will this take more time?" Li Ming smiled and said, "Don't worry, I will deal with this matter immediately. After all, I have received such a valuable thing from you." Han Siji said nothing more. After taking a deep breath, he sighed and said helplessly, "Okay, I'll take care of this matter." Li Ming nodded with satisfaction and turned away. Leaving the cave, Li Ming flew to the sky above the jungle, raised his hand and waved, and saw a flash of white light, and a capsule spaceship had emerged. Li Ming flew up, turned into a blue light, and disappeared into the spaceship. The spaceship started and flew straight into the sky. After leaving this place, Li Ming stood on the operating table and observed carefully. Whether it was Pumi civilization or Dulang civilization, Li Ming had to choose a second level civilization world, enter the second level civilization world first, and then solve the Han Siji issue. Li Ming planned to do so, but just as Li Ming's spaceship arrived in the space of Thurston Star, a huge spaceship suddenly appeared not far away. This spaceship was in the shape of a disc, and it was a spaceship dedicated to Pumi civilization. When he saw this, Li Ming couldn't help but exclaimed, "What I want is what I want. God helps me." He whispered and quickly clicked on the operating table, locking the other party's spaceship while requesting to connect. Li Ming was happy, but his request was immediately rejected, which made Li Ming frown, because Li Ming had already noted his name in Li Ming's request information. So why didn't the other party respond? The smiling expression disappeared immediately, and his brows frowned. "That's right, although Paget has invited me to enter the second level civilization world, it is not necessarily known to other people." Whispering like this, Li Ming gave up continuing to connect, and at the same time, clicked on the operating table, and a space map appeared. The Pumi civilization is located in the Swarth Galaxy Cluster, which is a member of the Hydra Centaurus supercluster. The number of large galaxies contained in the galaxy cluster is lower than that of the galaxy cluster, but it is also part of the supercluster. The galaxy cluster, where the second level civilization world is located, is under absolute control, and it is also the only civilized race. Of course, there are also a few other alien races mixed in it, and those minority alien groups are also advanced. In addition to the absolute control of the galaxy cluster, where it is located, the second level civilization also has a certain degree of control over the entire supercluster, or even absolute control. At least this is the case with the supercluster, where Li Ming is located. Ordinary civilizations will not be allowed to enter the second level civilization. After checking the location of the puny civilization, Li Ming shook his head slightly and whispered, "Transmission across galaxy clusters requires a space-time spaceship, and the current capsule spaceship is definitely not enough." As Li Ming was talking, a beeping sound suddenly came from the console. Li Ming then woke up and looked at it intently. The sound was that Li Ming's spaceship had been locked and could be attacked at any time. Hiss. Li Ming took a breath in surprise. Is it going to attack me? Li Ming looked at the control panel and said to himself in astonishment. However, in the silver spaceship at this time, two aliens with all silver bodies were talking to each other. The technology of this capsule spaceship is not like that of our supercluster, Brother Aubrey. One of the aliens said first. The brother who was respected as Aubrey also nodded slightly and said, "I have seen his information just now. He calls himself Li Ming. I don't know what kind of guy he is." The previous alien then looked at the control panel and pondered, whispering, "Is it an invader?" Aubrey also looked at it in confusion, then snorted and said, "Suspicious spaceship, catch it first." While speaking, Aubrey raised his hand and the disk spaceship then turned slightly and flew straight to Li Ming's capsule spaceship. Li Ming, who was in the main cabin of the spaceship, didn't know what happened, but he could see the circular spaceship flying towards him from the control panel. Since the other party did not launch an attack, Li Ming naturally stopped worrying. He touched his chin with his right hand and showed a thoughtful look. While Li Ming was still thinking about the reason, the silver disk spaceship suddenly came to the top of Li Ming's spaceship. This disk spaceship was huge, dozens of miles long and wide, like a silver pancake in the space, and a spaceship like Li Ming was completely inconspicuous in front of it. Just like a peanut hitting a pancake, the huge figure was clearly noticed as soon as it came over Li Ming's spaceship. I saw a blue light flash at the bottom of the spaceship, and a light chain flew out. This light chain was not vertical like a light column, but twisted left and right, like an electric arc, but it hit the spaceship where Li Ming was in just a flash. Li Ming only felt the spaceship vibrate slightly with a hum, and then the kinetic energy was completely lost. Even Li Ming's consciousness could no longer control the spaceship at all. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 614 Slavery. The energy of the spaceship seemed to be restrained by some force and could not be activated, but Li Ming's mental power could clearly sense it. The energy of the spaceship can no longer be used. Li Ming whispered. The energy of the spaceship could not be used, just like civilized creatures were bound by chains that suppressed energy and could not use the energy in their bodies. This strange phenomenon startled Li Ming, but a few seconds later, the blue light suddenly shrank rapidly, like a rope being pulled back. As the blue light shrank, Li Ming's spaceship was also pulled back. With a muffled bang, Li Ming's spaceship was tightly attached to the bottom of the silver spaceship, unable to move at all, like a piece of iron being firmly attracted by a magnet. Li Ming could even clearly sense the vibration of the spaceship, and his body was shaking on the spaceship. Damn, is it so violent? Whispering, Li Ming quickly stabilized his body, his face full of shock. When everything calmed down, Li Ming looked up. There was nothing unusual above his head, except the dark top of the main cabin. Li Ming then slowly lowered his head, frowned slightly, and said to himself, "Isn't it a spaceship docking?" Li Ming's consciousness could clearly sense what had just happened to the spaceship. The two spaceships were tightly together. This was the docking of spaceships. However, there was no transmission light column above his head, so Li Ming felt a little surprised. If it was a spaceship docking, there would definitely be a transmission light column after the spaceships touched each other, but there was no transmission light column after such a violent contact. What's going on? Li Ming looked puzzled. At this time, in the silver disk spaceship, Aubrey smiled slightly and whispered, "Capture successful. Okay, we can continue our mission." He laughed softly, raised his hand, and tapped the operating table, and the spaceship flew directly into the deep space of the universe. But at this time, Li Ming felt a little strange. The capsule spaceship lost all its power. Not only that, but it also lost all other functions. The portal and the operating table all failed. The entire spaceship was like a locked room. It could not be opened or operated from inside or outside. This is a bit unreasonable. Li Ming's face immediately became solemn, and he muttered to himself. He looked up at the top of the spaceship again. Li Ming raised his right hand slightly, and a green light flashed in his palm. A green dragon emerged. Li Ming raised his hand and threw it. The green dragon flashed and disappeared into the wall above his head. The green dragon passed through the wall of Li Ming's spaceship and directly entered a silver spaceship above his head. Ignoring any objects, the green dragon quickly came to the main cabin of the spaceship in the form of a phantom, and the two aliens also entered Li Ming's eyes. Under the observation of the green dragon, the information of the two people also entered Li Ming's mind bit by bit. The two aliens were both 2.2 level civilizations, native bloodlines of the Pumi civilization, and were completely Pumi civilizations. As the information of the two was obtained by Li Ming, Li Ming's face immediately became ugly, and there was even a bit of anger in his eyes. The world of secondary civilization is far more complicated than Li Ming imagined. The Pumi people have absolute control over the entire supercluster. Preventing other civilizations from entering the secondary civilization not only consolidates the absolute rule of the Pumi civilization, but also guarantees the ownership of all the energy in the supercluster. The two of them came for two things. One was to capture slaves, and the other was to bring a newly recruited foreigner back to the Pumi headquarters, the planet Pulpus. In the eyes of the Pumi people, foreigners always whisper to their own people. In addition to being tools for being enslaved, there is no other use. Moreover, in the eyes of the Pumi people, there is an extremely serious hierarchy, and there are clear work assignments for newly joined foreigners. The Pumi people will be at the top of the civilization of a supercluster, an absolute position that cannot be shaken, and the native Pumi people are a kind of existence, that is a secondary civilization from birth. Simply put, a newly born Pumi baby also has a secondary civilization, but this secondary civilization does not have any strength, but the cognition is very high and very extensive. After growth and training, it will gradually become an advanced and powerful secondary civilization. Moreover, these young secondary civilizations can choose their own destiny in the process of growing up. Whether to become a power civilization or a wisdom civilization, or a biological civilization or other civilizations. Just like human children going to school, parents will decide the direction for their children's future according to their talents. It's just that in advanced civilizations, this direction is more specific and more targeted. It is very difficult to refine each civilization, which requires both talent and effort, but the mature secondary civilization world can already make these more perfect. Even if they don't really become talents or masters in a certain field of civilization, the Pumi people can do what they want with their lofty status. In addition to the Pumi people, the second is a Shinuan position, which is the highest position given to foreigners by the Pumi people. They can participate in some confidential events of the Pumi people and be reused by the Pumi people. They are responsible for the security of the Pumi people, energy collection and acquisition, and some military control. It is a foreign role that is absolutely reused by the Pumi people. The next is the noble position, which is the title of foreigners second only to the Shinuan position. This position is also an outstanding master who serves the Pumi people completely. As for the last, merit position, it is equivalent to the ranks of senior soldiers, and the status is only slightly higher than that of slaves. Of course, in the eyes of the Pumi people, as long as they are foreigners, they are basically aliens, and there will never be equal treatment. No matter which position, there are limits and fixed quotas in the Pumi world. Not all foreigners can enter, and the proportion of this number is not fixed. It may increase or decrease with the number of Pumi people, and it may also change due to changes in the surrounding situation. The Pumi people will also recruit such beings from the outside world to use for themselves. The two Pumi people in front of them are relatively ordinary. They are neither high-level Pumi people nor outstanding beings. They are just ordinary and mediocre beings who do nothing. If not for this, these two people would not come out to capture slaves in person. Of course, from this perspective, the Pumi people are now extremely short of personnel, because one of their tasks this time is to bring a newly recruited, merit position, back to the mother planet. and Li Ming is just a slave they captured casually. Seeing this information, Li Ming's face was already gnashing his teeth, and he said viciously, the so-called second-level civilization world is actually this kind of virtue. The second-level civilization world I desperately want to enter is actually. Li Ming did not continue, but the angry expression on his face was beyond words. Li Ming had always believed that advanced civilizations would not have such a bad hierarchy, but now it seems that the situation is more serious than Li Ming expected. This hierarchy not only exists, but is also very serious. Li Ming is extremely disgusted with this system, and even hates it. At this moment, Li Ming has no intention of joining the puny civilization. The higher the civilization, the more ancient the system. No matter what, I can't join this kind of civilization world and become a slave and pawn of others. Li Ming muttered to himself, but when he said this, Li Ming's brows suddenly frowned, and his slightly blinking eyes seemed to think of something, and he secretly said, I originally planned to join the second-level civilization world and use it to curb the existence of those who threaten the Bihuang civilization, but now, with a bit of worry on his face, Li Ming had to reconsider this matter. Li Ming wanted to use the power of the second-level civilization to suppress other forces, but he did not want to join the second-level civilization world dominated by the puny civilization. This made things difficult for him. Thinking in his mind, his eyes were also threatening. For a while, Li Ming could not think of a better way. At this moment, Li Ming could only settle down temporarily and wait for a new method to be figured out before making a decision. In the main cabin of the disk spacecraft, King Lang was always monitoring the operation table, monitoring the movement of the spacecraft and the operation information of the spacecraft in real time, which allowed Li Ming to grasp his position and movement at any time. Chapter 615, New Method. For now, the spacecraft has no intention of returning to the Swarth Galaxy Group, which is the headquarters of the puny civilization. According to the console, the target destination is still in the Loneland Galaxy. Unable to think of a better way, Li Ming sat cross-legged in his main cabin and concentrated. The information in his mind turned back and forth, looking for methods and things that could be used, and while thinking, an item information suddenly popped up. This thing is exactly the scroll that Li Ming got from Hansji. Thinking of this scroll, Li Ming was extremely excited, as if all the previous troubles had disappeared. This scroll is called Cheyenne. The scroll is the same as the star book, which is the content of cultivation, but this star book does not have any ability, but is a star book for cultivation of artifacts and magic weapons. Simply put, by practicing this star book, you can master the use of artifacts. This method is not a simple fixed operation, but a kind of cultivation ability combined with the spirit. Li Ming only took a general look and has not carefully read the content above, but this point is extremely important to Li Ming, so Li Ming immediately agreed to Hansji's request as soon as he saw this item. At the moment, Li Ming just suddenly thought of this and had no intention of taking it out to watch or practice. After all, Hansji's problem has not been solved. Pulling his thoughts back, Li Ming sighed slightly and said to himself, is it only possible to solve Hansji's problem by violent means? Just thinking about it, Li Ming's expression suddenly changed. King Long, who was in the disk spaceship, had made a new discovery at this moment. At this time, a small planet had appeared on the operating table of the spaceship. The surface of this planet was bare, and there was not even an atmosphere. It was like a piece of iron floating in the universe. The disk spaceship locked onto this small planet. The reason for coming here was entirely because the merit position that was recruited was on this planet. The spaceship flashed and came to the surface of the planet and stopped at a low altitude of more than 10 meters above the ground. The surface of this planet was smooth, like a frosted layer, and it looked extremely hard, as if it were metal. In front of the spaceship, an alien was already waiting on a sand dune. This alien was only of level 2 civilization. He was dressed in black and armor. His hair was like long snakes floating in the air. His height of nearly 3 meters was very conspicuous on the bare ground. At this time, a blue light flashed slightly in front of the spaceship, and a beam of light shot in front of the alien. After the light, an alien appeared, and it was Aubrey. At the same time, a white light flashed in Li Ming's hand, and a light blade appeared in his hand. He aimed at the spaceship under his feet and gently cut it. A long crack appeared on the capsule spaceship. Then there were 2 more strokes, and a whole piece of the cabin wall was cut off by Li Ming. Li Ming's move was to cut a hole in the bottom of the spaceship, and the cut bottom immediately fell. Li Ming also took this opportunity to flash his body. With a flash of light, Li Ming fell to the ground before the cut piece of the spaceship. He raised his right arm and caught the cut piece of the spaceship that was about to fall to the ground. Although the cut piece was huge, it was as light as a feather in front of Li Ming, who had energy. Li Ming caught it because he was worried that the noise would alarm the alien. He gently placed the cut piece on the ground. The blue halo on Li Ming's feet spread out in circles, and his body also sank into the ground little by little and disappeared. At this time, Aubrey, who was far away, took a few steps forward and came to the alien. He looked up and down at the alien with his eyes, with a look of contempt on his face, and said coldly, "Haozin, I have kept you waiting for a long time." The alien named Haozin bowed slightly to show respect, but did not say a word. Aubrey looked down at the other party with a proud attitude and said, "The reason why you are included in the second level civilization world of Pumi civilization is because of your unique ability. Even Dulang civilization cannot catch you. I admire this very much." Haozin continued to bow his head and still did not say a word. At this time, under the ground, Li Ming saw all of this, and he looked at Haozin a few more times. With a frown, Li Ming began to think. Leave now, and then solve Hansage's problem alone, or, Li Ming said to himself. Li Ming's original plan was to leave quietly. With Li Ming's means, there would be no problem in leaving this place without their sight. But now Li Ming suddenly had a new idea. HMPH. Then, thinking in his heart, Li Ming's eyes suddenly widened a little, and a green light flashed in his eyeballs, and a green triangle pattern had emerged. At this time, Aubrey on the ground showed satisfaction and said, "Let's go. Follow me to the headquarters first." Haozin still lowered his head slightly and replied, "Yes." As soon as the voice fell, Aubrey turned and walked towards the direction of the spaceship, and Haozin behind him also followed closely. At this time, Li Ming seemed to have found the right opportunity. He exerted his eyes slightly and whispered, "Phantom Dragon." A green light flew out from the ground and entered Haozin's body. The green light passed through his body and went directly into his brain. Haozin felt a sharp pain in his head and his eyes became blurred. Haozin was only a second level civilization, the same level as Li Ming, but the surprise of energy was immediately reflected. However, Li Ming did not have any killing intentions or other intentions towards this person. He only invaded his brain briefly. Ah. Haozin groaned, and his body suddenly bent, and knelt on the ground, holding his head with his hands, in great pain. Aubrey, who was walking in front, paused when he heard the sound. Just as he was about to turn around, a crack suddenly appeared on the ground under his feet. Before Aubrey could react, a pair of hands suddenly reached out from the ground, grabbed Aubrey's legs, and then pulled them hard. With a whoosh, Aubrey was dragged into the ground. After a few seconds, Aubrey rose from the ground again, and the crack in the ground slowly closed. He looked down at Haozin with his cold eyes and whispered, "What's wrong with you?" Haozin raised his head slightly, and the severe pain in his head disappeared. His eyesight also returned to normal. He looked around, and found nothing unusual. He hesitated for a moment, and stood up from the ground and replied, I'm fine." Haozin said this with a puzzled look on his face, not knowing what had just happened. Aubrey nodded gently and said, "If you're fine, hurry up and leave." He turned around and continued to walk towards the spaceship. Haozin was confused. No matter how hard he thought, he didn't know what had just happened, but he could only continue to leave with Aubrey. With a flash of blue light, Aubrey and Haozin entered the spaceship together, but they did not come directly to the main cabin. Haozin was placed in a cabin alone. At this time, Aubrey returned to the main cabin. At this time, Aubrey was not the real Aubrey, but the one transformed by Li Ming. With a slight smile on his face, he came to the operating table from the main cabin. "Brother Aubrey, the mission is completed. Can we return?" Aubrey looked at Li Ming and said. Li Ming glanced at him and said, "Brother, it's rare for us to come out for a trip. We have to look around. Otherwise, wouldn't our trip be too boring?" Aubrey opened his eyes wide when he heard this, but soon laughed ha 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 and said, "That's great. Li Ming then raised his hand and pointed. The huge operating table flashed blue light, and the galaxy map emerged. Li Ming locked a position with a click. Aubrey didn't seem to care where to go. As long as he could play outside for a while, he would be satisfied. Li Ming was naturally very clear about Aubrey's psychological characteristics. And the position that Li Ming was locking on was Kenna, a planet on the edge of the Hydra galaxy cluster. While operating, Li Ming couldn't help but look back and suddenly remembered a guy named Haozin and thought to himself, Haozin is actually from this supercluster. Li Ming was not familiar with this person, but he did find some information from his brain consciousness. Haozin, like Li Ming, came from this galaxy group and also came to the second level civilization by self-advancing, but due to the pursuit of the DI organization and Cheyenne organization, Haozin had almost no place to stay in this supercluster. However, although this person's civilization level is not high, he has a strong ability to escape, which makes the two organizations of Cheyenne and DI who have not captured him. Chapter 616, Fake Tiger. Haozin was also forced to come to the Hydra Centaur supercluster little by little. Now that he can join the second level civilization world, it is the best result for him. However, Haozin may not know the darkness of the second level civilization world at this moment. Of course, this person has nothing to do with Li Ming, so there is no need to think too much about him. Looking at the operating table, the spacecraft has started the time-space shuttle and is about to arrive at the Hydra cluster from the Centaur cluster. At this moment, on the big star of the Lapnum galaxy, in a secret cave, Nicole stood on a stone pillar, looking coldly at the direction of the cave in trance, with an extremely ugly face. The entrance of the cave was pitch black, but a shadow was approaching little by little with the sound of footsteps. In the center of the cave, the light was bright, and the shadow was getting closer and closer, and gradually became lighter. The thing that came was only more than 1 meter tall, but the body was wide, like a giant turtle. Under the body were not the soles of the feet, but soft tentacles. It was unclear how many tentacles there were, but the movement of the body depended entirely on the creeping of those tentacles. The head was still that of a turtle, and the hard shell was covered with inverted bone spurs, which looked hard and sharp. As soon as Nicole saw this figure, she said from a distance, "Yinch, why didn't Keanu come?" The turtle figure came to Nicole and stopped near her. There were vertical stone pillars everywhere. Yinch looked up at Nicole and said, "According to what you said, Keanu has transferred 1/3 of the source body. Now he has other things to do. I came here to talk about the next thing." Nicole's eyes sank slightly and said, "So, you already know about Bernard's cruise in the bay?" Yinch did not respond directly, but snorted and said, "Bad news often spreads quickly. Compared with these, I'm more concerned about the arrangements of the eye of the center of the earth." Speaking of the eye of the center of the earth, Nicole's face immediately became solemn, as if he had mentioned some key object, and Yinch also looked solemn, and looked at the other party. But just as the two were about to discuss in detail, a voice suddenly came from the darkness. "Which planet will the eye of the earth appear on? Do you really know?" When the voice came, the two turned their heads at the same time, with nervous expressions. In the darkness, a transparent figure like water quietly walked out, and as the figure kept approaching, the transparent body of this person gradually solidified. He was dressed in grey, and had a tall figure. The person who came was the Blood Hunter. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Blood Hunter. I come from the Dark Technology civilization. I'm a major." While speaking, the whole body had completely recovered its solidification. Nicole and Shadow Coyote couldn't help but look at each other. Unsure of what was going on, they turned their eyes to each other at the same time. Blood Hunter continued, "The biotechnology on which the Orcs and Zerg rely for their progress, the eye of the center of the earth. If it falls into the hands of a secondary civilization, your development will stagnate, which will undoubtedly increase the risk of your extinction." Nicole stared at Blood Hunter and said, "Dark technology asks you? It seems like there is no communication between us, and you come here alone." Before Nicole finished speaking, Blood Hunter immediately said again, "The Orc civilization is a civilization carefully cultivated by the Center of the Earth civilization. As a traditional partner of the Center of the Earth civilization, we, the Dark Technology civilization, have the need and obligation to let you survive. So, I'm here to help you. Shadow Mirage showed a surprised expression on his face, staring at each other, and said, Central Earth Civilization? Blood Hunter came to the stone pillar between the two of them, jumped onto the stone pillar, and said, in the world of cosmic civilization, the most mysterious civilization is the center of the Earth civilization. Of course, there is nothing wrong with that. The eye of the center of the Earth appears at intervals. This is exactly how the center of the Earth civilization observes the civilization it has cultivated, and provides more help. The surprised figure of the Blood Hunter shrank slightly, his brows tightened, and his eyes turned to Nicole. Nicole was also shocked. Seeing this, the Blood Hunter smiled lightly and continued, about the eye of the Earth's core, we have to have a deep chat. The tense atmosphere eased slightly. Nicole and Shadow Mirage were still a little wary of the Blood Hunter, but at this moment, they didn't mind listening to each other's suggestions. While talking here, Li Ming drove the disk spaceship to the space of a planet. This planet was called Kenna, and the whole planet was basically crystals and crystal blocks. On the surface, this planet looked somewhat similar to the silicon-based life planet that Li Ming had seen at the beginning, but this planet had relatively fewer crystal blocks, and looked more ordinary. Li Ming lightly tapped on the console to send the message, and the Jingpo civilization that received the message immediately responded. Li Ming was now heading to Kenna Star as a Pumi. Not to mention the connection request, he dared not even drive the spaceship directly into the Jingpo civilization. At this time, Li Ming took the initiative to send a message, which was already a very polite act. The Jingpo civilization that received the attack message made a respectful reply at this time. A bird looked at the message with a disdainful look on his face and said, brother, if you want to enter this Kenna Star, just go directly. Do you have to notify them? Li Ming smiled lightly and said, you and I are here to play, but just take a look. As long as you have fun, it's fine. Of course, it's best not to cause any trouble, otherwise it will be difficult to explain when you go back. As he said this, the spaceship had already started and was heading straight for Kenna Star. At this time, the spaceship did not use the teleportation ability, but flew directly into the planet. As for the ground of Kenna Star, naturally, no objection was dared, and only the information of the headquarters was told to Li Ming. The huge disk spaceship slowly entered the planet, and Li Ming naturally went straight to the headquarters of Kenna Star. A dark sky appeared over a group of crystal blocks. A huge disc-shaped spaceship blocked out the sun, and came over the group of buildings like a dark cloud. On a flat-topped building in the group of buildings, two aliens were already standing on the roof, waiting respectfully. Li Ming had already seen the two on the operating table. He turned his eyes slightly, then looked at a bird beside him and said, go down and call their leader up. I'll ask if there are any fun places on Kenna. A bird nodded happily, but soon said, brother, can I go around first? Li Ming chuckled twice and said, do whatever you want, but you must come back immediately after receiving my call. Ha ha ha. Great, brother, just come back. With excitement in his mouth, a bird turned around and left directly. Li Ming looked at the other person's leaving figure, and his eyes naturally showed a color of thinking about something else. A moment later, the portal at the edge of the main cabin flashed blue light, and a 2-meter tall crystal man walked in. This man looked similar to a human, but was stronger. Apart from a set of armor, the exposed surface of his body was made up of tiny crystal blocks. It was as if the whole man was made of broken glass. As soon as this strong guy saw Li Ming, he bowed his head and said, does Lord Aubrey have any instructions? Li Ming smiled lightly and replied, no instructions. I just happened to pass by here, so I came to take a look. As he said this, Li Ming walked up to the crystal man and looked him up and down. The crystal man in front of him was a second-level civilization, and Li Ming saw a lot of information just by looking at him. With a slight smile on his lips, he walked around the vigilant man without stopping, and said at the same time, I heard that there are already 3 second-level civilizations on your planet Kenna. Don't you want to say something about this? As soon as these words came out, the crystal man's body shook, as if someone had told him a secret in his heart. After hesitating for a while, he said, Lord Aubrey, who told you this? You must not believe it. Our Jingpo civilization has always maintained the Pumi civilization, and suppressed the orcs. How could it be? Before the crystal man finished speaking, Li Ming waved his hand to stop him from continuing, and continued, "It doesn't matter where the news comes from. What's important is the accuracy of this information. You know very well how many second level civilizations there are in your Jingpo civilization, but I don't want to pursue this matter now." The crystal man's eyes rolled back and forth, his face full of caution and worry, but after hearing Li Ming's last words, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 617, The Whereabouts of Zin's Body. Li Ming returned to the operating table, raised his hand, and tapped it lightly. Blue light flashed, and the starry sky pattern kept changing. Li Ming said, "You are controlling the Thurston planet in the Lawnland Galaxy, right?" This sudden question startled the crystal man. After a little thought, he quickly replied, "Yes, that's right." Li Ming turned around, showing a look of dissatisfaction on his face, and said, "Withdraw all your troops from Thurston planet, and at the same time, let the Luoba Star Plunder Group and other forces all leave. I plan to take over this planet myself." "Ah." The crystal man raised his head suddenly, and let out a surprised sound. This surprised look made Li Ming even more dissatisfied. He glanced at the other party coldly and said, "What? Do you have any objections?" No. Since it was decided by Lord Aubrey, there is naturally no problem. I will arrange it when I'm young." The crystal man replied immediately. Li Ming's eyes widened slightly and he said, "No, you should go right away. I'm here today for this matter. If you do this well and everything is fine, if I go to Thurston Star again and see foreign forces, then..." The crystal man's expression tightened and he said, "No, absolutely not. I'll arrange it right away." As soon as he finished speaking, the crystal man turned around and left quickly. Li Ming stood there and watched the other party leave. His expression returned to normal, and he thought to himself, the matter of Ansji has finally been explained. The giant disk spacecraft stayed above the building complex for a moment, then started and flew into the depths of the sky. At this time, a bird said in front of the operating table with a dissatisfied look on his face, "Brother, this is too fast to leave. I haven't started to have fun yet." Li Ming smiled lightly, looked at the operating table and said, "There will be other opportunities in the future. Don't rush now. You will definitely have fun following me." While persuading, Li Ming determined the target position on the operating table. Hearing this, a bird could only sigh helplessly and replied unwillingly, "Okay." The destination of the spacecraft is exactly the Swarth Galaxy Cluster, the Pulpus Star, the headquarters of the Pumi people. Although this destination has been set, Li Ming has no intention of entering the Pulpus Star. Before actually arriving at the Pulpus Star, Li Ming still has to find a way to get out. At the same time, a medium-sized spacecraft is approaching the Swarth Galaxy Cluster little by little. The spacecraft is pitch black and U-shaped. It is not big as a whole. It is like the length of a 33-story building, and the width is only about 50 or 60 meters. In the main cabin of the spacecraft, two aliens are talking to each other. One is strong, like a big man, carrying a cross behind him. His face is similar to that of a human, and he looks like a monk. There is also a string of beads hanging around his neck. The other one is a hunchbacked alien, only more than 1 meter tall, with green skin, 2 pointed ears, and a wooden stick in his hand. Junbug. This is the last order, right? This time it's over. Can you take me to see Rodalia? The big man carrying a cross said solemnly. The green alien named Kinbuge walked slowly to the operating table step by step. After chuckling twice strangely, he said, "Of course, as long as I can succeed this time, I can retire. You, Hornston, are a hero of the Zupping organization." The big man Hornston snorted and said, "I only want Rathalia." Kinbuge glanced at him coldly and said, "How could I forget what I promised you? Don't worry." Upon hearing this, Hornston grinned and said, "I can finally see Miss Rathalia." Kinbuge's eyes returned to the operating table, but he said casually, "Since you like Miss Rathalia so much, why don't you join our Zupping organization?" As soon as he finished speaking, Kinbuge suddenly paused, his eyes slightly raised, and his whole body stiffened, as if he realized something terrible. His head turned back slowly like a deer, and he thought to himself, "This guy's not angry again." When Kinbuge turned his head, he saw Hornston's eyes wide open, sparks flying from his eyes, and even his whole head was burning with flames of anger. His white teeth kept showing under his trembling lips, and he said word by word, "How can you say you like her? That is supreme worship. Even if it is just kissing her toes, it is my honor. I will not allow you to blaspheme her." Kinbuge had a trembling expression on his face, and immediately replied, "Yes, yes, you are right, it is worship." Hearing this, Ornston's arrogance subsided, and Kinbuge also breathed a sigh of relief, turned around and looked at the operating table again, but he thought in his heart, he is obviously a pervert, and he still talks so high sounding. Thinking of this, he tapped his finger lightly on the operating table, and said, "I have locked the target area, get ready for action." At this moment, the disc-shaped spacecraft driven by Li Ming had arrived at the outer edge of the Swarth Galaxy group. Looking at the operating table in front of him, Li Ming became a little worried. "Do we really have to enter the Pulpus star? I have no interest in that place." Whispering, Li Ming looked around and carefully observed the galaxies around him. Just as Li Ming was thinking about how to get out, a light suddenly flashed on the console and a message appeared. Message: an unknown spacecraft is trying to approach the church star. Please go and check the nearby Pumi people's combat power. Upon seeing this message, Li Ming frowned, and information about the church star appeared. Church star, Pumi civilization, one of the battle bases, simply put, is a combat power growth training base. When Pumi people reach adulthood, they can be assigned to various battle bases for training. When they reach the civilization power they have cultivated, they can advance, that is, graduate. Pumi people who come out of here can directly become one of the combat forces of the Pumi civilization, and after future training, they will become elite combat forces. Of course, in addition to this, the battle base also comes with a large amount of resources, which are also provided to those combat power training personnel. In addition to elixirs and equipment, there are also more precious, Zin body, and Langsin. Langsin is a single stage advanced item, which is a must-have item for the battle base, while Zinti is different. Zinti is an interval advanced object, which is naturally more rare. The Pumi people control all the resources of the Hydra Centaur supercluster, and the resources they mainly control are advanced items. But after all, this is just a battle base, and the reserves of resource materials are not high. They are mainly provided to outstanding members. Li Ming immediately became interested after seeing this information, and thought to himself, Zinti exists? Li Ming was thinking about it, and a bird on the side suddenly showed a look of horror, and occasionally looked at Li Ming's serious expression, and said, "Brother, let's return to Pulpus Star first. This kind of thing is definitely not aimed at us. And we have a mission, or let's not participate." A bird said worriedly. Li Ming turned his eyes, looked back at the other party, nodded slightly, and said, "Yes, you and I both have missions, and it is not convenient to participate in this kind of thing." Hearing what Li Ming said, a bird immediately smiled. But Li Ming immediately said, "But the headquarters must know the path of our spacecraft. If we just turn a blind eye to it, won't it be difficult to explain when we go back?" After hearing this, a bird paused and couldn't help but ponder. Li Ming just stared at him intently and didn't say anything more. Li Ming knew very well that the brothers Aubrey and Abert were cowardly and accomplices of the tiger. Their status among the Pumi people was also at the bottom. They were not good at cultivating civilization and could only rely on the bloodline of the Pumi people to show their status. Such people still account for a high proportion among the Pumi people. The reason is naturally related to the operation of the Pumi civilization. Of course, even a small number of elite Pumi people can maintain the status of their own tribe. Looking at the information on the console in front of him, Li Ming said again, "I think this is the best. You take the captured slaves back first to complete the task, and I will go to Kwakiakixing to see it. Isn't this the best of both worlds?" After hearing this, Abert immediately showed a touching look, looked at Li Ming affectionately, and said, "Brother is still the best to me." As he said this, he actually hugged Li Ming in his arms. Chapter 618:01! Exclamation mark. There are many triangular small spaceships on the huge silver disk spaceship, which can be used as escape spaceships or dispatch spaceships, and are multi-purpose. At this time, a hatch on the top of the disk spaceship slowly opened, and then a triangular spaceship slowly rose, and the surface flashed with light, and it broke through the air directly. The driver of this triangular spaceship was Li Ming. Originally, Li Ming was looking for an excuse to get rid of a bird, and at the same time he could not provoke the second level civilization world like the Pumi people. This was a good opportunity. Li Ming could have just left, but the Xin body attracted Li Ming deeply. It was an advanced material for the interval. With a Xin body, Li Ming could directly reach the top state of the first interval. Li Ming could never refuse this temptation, so at this time, Li Ming had to go to Church Star to take a look. Church Star is a wandering planet, but the planet will automatically revolve around the center of swath, and its movement trajectory and specific coordinates will be monitored by the pulpus star in real time. The reason for choosing a wandering planet is precisely because of its concealment and uncertainty, because even a second level civilization world will have its own challenges. In the dark night sky, Church Star was moving in the universe like a grain of sand, inconspicuous and unnoticeable, while a U-shaped spaceship had been eyeing the planet from afar. Although it had not yet approached, the aliens in the main cabin of the spaceship had already started to operate. In the corridor of the spaceship, Kinbug was in front and Hornston was behind. "Repeat your task, Mr. Hornston," Kinbug said without looking back as he walked in front. Hornston raised his hand in the back and pointed at the void. Blue light began to emerge in the air of the corridor. The light moved with the steps of the two people and wove in a metal box in the air. Hornston looked at the metal box and said, "Find the Zinti storage box and bring him back." Kinbug raised his left hand and said, "No, it's not to bring it back. It's you who sent the signal and I will pick you up." As they spoke, the two did not stop at all. Hearing this, Hornston quickly corrected, "Yes, I found the storage box of the Xin body, sent a signal, and you came to pick me up." Hearing this, Jinbyaja nodded with satisfaction. The two came to the end of the corridor, and a metal door appeared in front of them. Jinbyaja raised the cane in his right hand and gently tapped the door. Circles of ripples spread out, and the metal door disappeared, just like ripples on the water. Passing through this door, they came to a cabin. The entire cabin is not big, more than 10 meters long and wide, and in the middle of the cabin is this egg-like metal ellipsoid. Jinbyaja stopped far in front of this object, turned his eyes, and looked at Hornston behind him. Hornston immediately understood, took a few steps forward, and came to the metal ellipsoid, raised his hand and gently stroked it twice, writing a certain character, and the metal ball lit up with a hum. The originally hard surface of the metal ball suddenly became transparent, like a door that suddenly opened. As soon as Halston stepped in, the metal ball immediately materialized and returned to its original appearance. Jinbyaja watched all this, nodded with satisfaction, and turned to leave. Back in the main cabin, Jinbyaja swiped his fingers on the operating table, and the blue light on the operating table flashed, locking a target. At this time, the metal sphere that Halston had just entered slowly rose vertically, and two mechanical arms on the top of the cabin extended out. The mechanical arms grasped the metal ball with force and lifted it to the top, and a round door on the top of the cabin opened, and the chicken-like metal ball was loaded into a pipe like a cannonball. At this time, Jinbyaja in front of the operating table watched all the processes and whispered, "Ready." He pointed at the planet in front of him and said, "Let's go." Suddenly, a white light flashed in a hole on the top of the spacecraft, and then an object shot out, disappearing from sight with just a flash. Looking at the things launched, Jinbyaja's expression was serious, and he whispered, "It's all up to you, Hornston." As soon as the voice fell, the U-shaped spacecraft became transparent in the universe little by little, and finally disappeared, as if it was completely invisible. At this moment, Li Ming drove the triangular spacecraft to the vicinity of Church Star. Li Ming did not enter the planet directly, but stopped in the space of Church Star. Looking at the control panel, Li Ming couldn't help but touch his chin. Didn't they say that there was an invasion of alien spacecraft? Why is there nothing? The control panel was calm. There were neither alien spacecraft nor alien celestial bodies in the nearby airspace. Everything was abnormally calm, and there was no tension as described in the information. Since we are here, we might as well go up and see what's going on. As he said this, Li Ming was ready to enter the planet, but at this moment, a connection message had been received. Li Ming looked closely and found that the connection message came from the land of Church Star. Li Ming's spacecraft had been discovered. Li Ming clicked to confirm without hesitation. Li Ming is still in the appearance of Aubrey and is also a Pumi. Li Ming has nothing to worry about. After the spaceship was connected, Li Ming's spaceship was controlled by the land of the planet and began to transmit according to the designated location of the other party. A muffled sound of bang was heard, and the triangular spaceship disappeared in the space. When the spaceship appeared again, it was already above the barren desert. Li Ming had already known about the geomorphic features of this planet. The entire surface of Church Star was basically covered with yellow sand. Even if there were occasional rolling hills, they were also formed by yellow sand. Not only that, the surface of the planet was raging with strong winds, and the yellow sand was constantly floating with the strong winds. The place where Li Ming landed was relatively remote, just above the desert, which made Li Ming confused. There was nothing below, and he was arranged to land here. He really didn't know what the intention was. But since he was arranged here, there must be the other party's intention. Li Ming decided to go down and see what was going on. He turned around and walked out of the cabin. At the bottom of the spaceship, the blue light flickered slightly, and Li Ming's figure gradually emerged, and as soon as he came out of the spaceship, Li Ming was stunned. There was no desert under his eyes, but a large building complex. The buildings here were of different styles, completely different from those Li Ming had seen before. There were no high-rise buildings here, all of which were single-story attics. The appearance of these attics was basically the same, like a palace, each of which was 100 meters high and wide. And this was only on the ground. There were buildings in the air. The buildings in the air were round, like a sphere floating in the air. There was nothing special about it, except that the palace on the ground was only a few dozen meters high. These spherical buildings in the air were made of special materials to float, and they have been maintained at a certain height without any change. The ground between the buildings was a smooth and flat road, but there was no one there, and the entire building complex was like a ghost town. Seeing all this, Li Ming even couldn't believe his eyes. Because from the operating console of the spaceship, this was just a desert area, but after arriving in person, he saw that it was a building area under his eyes. This was not because Li Ming used his wisdom eye ability, but because a unique shielding device was installed here. Seeing this, Li Ming can get this from the information in Aubrey's brain. The Pumi civilization has a very high level of technical attainments on the spacecraft. This barrier is created for the spacecraft. The sensing system of the spacecraft can only capture the virtual information given by the barrier. If an alien spacecraft accidentally breaks into this place, it must leave directly. The barren desert has no value. In addition to the shielding for the spacecraft, there is also the spacecraft capture system, which is also a technology for the spacecraft. Li Ming has experienced this before. His capsule spacecraft was directly captured by Aubrey's spacecraft and had no ability to resist. But since he was arranged here by the ground system, why is there no one in the building area here? Li Ming said to himself in confusion. Where are all the people? Chapter 619, Hornston. Li Ming was still puzzled by this. Suddenly, a spherical building in the distance in the sky flashed with light, and then an alien with a completely silver-white body flew over. Li Ming saw this person from a distance and immediately obtained the other party's information from Aubrey's brain. Spiritual civilization mentor, Lang. Li Ming was secretly surprised. The person flying towards him was the spiritual civilization mentor here, and the highest leader of this battle base. The battle base was divided according to different abilities. Obviously, this was the battle base that specialized in spiritual civilization. In this case, the reason why there were so few people here can be explained. There were very few people who were suitable for practicing spiritual civilization, and naturally there were even fewer who could practice successfully. Facing Lang flying towards him, Li Ming immediately got up his spirits. After all, the other party was also spiritual civilization, and it was a level 2.5 civilization. That was not something Li Ming could deal with. If the other party saw through Li Ming's identity, everything would be bad. But just when the other party was about to fly close to Li Ming, a light spot suddenly flashed in the sky, and the next second, a huge object fell directly from the air. All I could see was a huge object landing, and I couldn't even see what it was. As the object landed, a loud boom sounded, and the sound was deafening, like a bomb exploding not far away, and my ears were buzzing. This object just fell into a building complex not far away, as if it was a giant artillery shell fired at this area. The ground was shaking, and smoke, dust, and sand were flying in the explosion. In addition to the strong wind, the shock wave was sand on the ground. A large area of palaces on the ground was directly reduced to debris in this explosion. Li Ming quickly raised his arm to block the strong wind coming towards him, and the cloak behind him kept fluttering under the use of this shockwave. Lang, who was originally flying towards Li Ming, also stopped in place at this time, and the two of them looked at the place where the explosion occurred. The shockwave stopped in just 1 or 2 seconds, and the smoke and dust in the distance were also dissipating rapidly. A huge deep pit with a length and width of nearly 1,000 meters appeared in front of us, which was formed by the explosion just now. An object appeared in the center of the explosion zone. It was oval and shaped like an egg. It did not fall directly into the earth, like ordinary falling objects. Instead, it stood upright in the center of the huge pit. Li Ming stared at the object and thought to himself, it seems that the explosion just now was to reduce the impact of its landing, so it did not go deep into the ground directly under inertia. Looking intently, not blinking, Lang, who was not far away, also focused his attention on the object. 4 figures flew out from the surface of a spherical building farther away. This building was the one Lang had just walked out of. The 4 people must have been startled by the explosion. While looking at the ruins of the explosion, they looked at language. The 4 people flew over here. Before the 4 people came close, Lang suddenly raised his palm to the 4 people, made a gesture to stop them, and said sternly, "Don't come over." The 4 people stopped immediately after hearing the voice, not daring to move at all, with worried expressions on their faces. At this moment, the sphere in the center of the explosion zone suddenly made a squeaking sound, and cracks appeared one after another, just like a chick about to break out of an egg. Li Ming's eyes widened a little at this time, and his wisdom ability was activated. Lang also had a serious expression and a tense look. Snap! A crisp sound was heard, and the entire metal sphere was completely shattered, and an alien appeared immediately. This person was broad and strong, tall and mighty, and his appearance was similar to that of a human, almost exactly the same, but he looked stronger. He was more than 2 meters tall, and he carried a cross on his back that was almost as tall as his height. There was a necklace hanging around his neck, and the necklace was made of beads. This person was Hornston, a 2.6 level civilization, the top existence of the second interval of the second level civilization. Snap! Hornston took 2 steps, and stepped out of the broken metal shell. With just these 2 steps, a powerful aura spread out. Li Ming's body trembled slightly, his expression stiffened instantly, and he stood there motionless as if petrified. His mind had entered a highly concentrated state. Even Lang, who was not far away, was concentrating, not daring to neglect it at all, and his eyes were focused on Hornston's position. As for the 4 guys in the distance, they shrank, and beads of sweat immediately flowed down their foreheads. Their trembling bodies even wanted to escape directly from here. Although these 4 people were also practitioners of spiritual civilization, they could not control their fear under such a powerful aura. Hornston glanced at everyone in the sky, not caring at all. He turned his head left and right and checked the surrounding environment. Finally, he looked at Lang in the air. "Are you going to tell me where the things are? Or should I find them myself?" Hornston said directly. Lang gritted his teeth, frowned, and said, "I won't let you take anything here." As he said this, a black shadow flashed on the surface of Lang's body. The black shadow was like a shadow, but it was irregular in shape, and did not overlap with his body. Instead, it kept shaking on the surface of the body, as if it would rush out of the body at any time. Seeing this, Hornston remained calm and didn't care. He slowly raised his right hand, and a golden sphere formed on his palm. At the same time, he said, "It seems that I can only find it myself." As he said this, Hornston's other hand also raised up, and a golden sphere appeared in the palm of his hand. Then he put his hands together in front of his chest, and clapped his hands 11 times. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and a golden shadow sphere formed in the middle of the 2 palms. The sphere was only the size of a basketball at the moment the 2 palms were put together, but there was no sign of anything unusual. It was only after passing through it that the shadow golden sphere suddenly glowed slightly. Water lotus. Hornston suddenly shouted. The golden sphere suddenly spread out with a buzzing sound. In just a moment, the golden shadow had completely enveloped the entire building complex. The huge sphere was like a golden bubble suddenly appearing on the surface of Church Star. Li Ming could sense the golden shadow passing by his body, but there was no abnormality in his body, as if nothing had happened. But in Hornston's eyes, it was completely different. All objects were completely transparent, and its function was the same as that of Zlai. Any life and object, as long as it was within this range, could be seen directly without being blocked. Hornston slowly put down his hands, and just as he was about to check, he first looked at Li Ming. At this time, Li Ming had become a composite of two shadows in Hornston's eyes. That is, Li Ming's means of illusion had been seen through by him. But Hornston only looked at Li Ming for a second longer, and immediately turned his eyes to other places. The surrounding buildings, including the buildings in the air, were all within his field of vision. After a check, his eyes suddenly fixed on a palace building on the ground, and he smiled slightly. So it's there. As soon as these words came out, Lang, who was in the sky, opened his eyes a little wider, because the place where Hornston was looking was exactly where he was extremely worried. In that building, a 1-foot long and wide metal box caught Hornston's attention. Lang in the sky's expression tightened, and his right hand suddenly turned over, and a metal plate appeared in his palm. The metal plate was the size of the palm and black. After looking at the metal plate in his hand, he suddenly squeezed it hard. Open. He also shouted in a low voice. In an instant, the interiors of all the buildings were slightly bright. At this time, Li Ming was confused, and he couldn't tell what the two were doing. It seemed that the two were using a code that Li Ming couldn't recognize. But from Hornston's perspective, everything was clear. At this time, Hornston was just about to run to the building, but he stopped suddenly, after taking 2 steps. He looked around with his eyes and his face became solemn. Because a metal box appeared in every building at this time. Chapter 620 The two most enjoyable things in life. All the buildings look the same, but under Lang's operation, the same metal box suddenly appeared in each building. This created a kind of confusion. Hornston glanced at Lang, and his eyes immediately returned to the building he locked on for the first time, whispering, "The first one to find it should not be wrong." Lang in the sky seemed to see Hornston's intention, and he was not worried at this time, but the energy on his body began to flicker slightly, as if preparing for the battle. At this moment, Li Ming's eyes turned slightly, and his body shrank back slightly. Li Ming didn't want to be involved in the battle in the second section. It would be best to avoid it from a distance. The most important thing is that the two people's behavior just now was strange. I don't know what they did, but Li Ming didn't understand it at all. But the current situation is not a bad thing for Li Ming. This 2.5 level civilization and the 2.6 level civilization will fight for a while, and it will be difficult to determine the winner. When they fight fiercely, Li Ming can quietly search for the whereabouts of Zinti. Even if he can't find Zinti, finding Lan Xin is also a good harvest. Thinking this in his mind, Li Ming's figure had quietly retreated to a distance. At the same time, he turned his right hand and a green light shot out. It was the flying dragon. At this time, Hornston had already locked onto the palace he had seen at the beginning. He moved his body and flashed with a hum. It was as if his body had a double image, but the next moment he disappeared from the spot. When Hornston appeared again, he was already right above the palace. He clenched his right hand into a fist, and the surface of his fist flashed with golden light. He aimed at the building and smashed it directly. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the entire palace turned into ruins. Hornston floated above the ruins, looked around, and suddenly fell down. His feet stepped on the broken building debris, and he lowered his head and reached into the debris under his feet. Clatter, there was a sound, and when his arm was taken out of the ruins, there was already a silver metal box in his hand. Looking at the metal box in his hand, Hornston showed a hint of danger and said, "Found it." Seeing Hornston get the metal box, Lang's expression was still calm, just watching from a distance without saying a word. This calm behavior naturally attracted Hornston's attention. He looked at Lang in the air, and then looked at the metal box in his hand, with a look of doubt on his face. Under the golden light field, each of the buildings here has a metal box. The first metal box found may not be real, but may just be a bait. After hesitating for a second, Hornston whispered, "It seems that we can only know whether it is true or not by opening it." This action also attracted Li Ming's attention. Looking at the box that Hornston got, Li Ming secretly said, "Could it be that is the body of Xin?" Under the gaze of Li Ming and Lang, Hornston held the metal box in his right hand, and his left hand was slowly placed on the metal box, as if he was going to open the box. Li Ming and Lang were both concentrating. Li Ming's idea at this moment was naturally to see what was in the box. If it was Xin's body, then Li Ming would not need to look for it, and could just get out and escape from here. But if it was not, Li Ming would still have to find her chance. But at this moment, Lang looked at it with a strange look, giving people the impression that the box was a box that contained important items, but his facial expression was full of uncertainty. Under the gaze of the two, Hornston exerted force with his left hand, and the box actually opened with a bang. However, at the moment, when the box was just opened, beams of white light scattered from the open gap. Hornston's face changed slightly, but it was too late. Boom. A loud noise was heard, and the violent explosion caused the earth to shake slightly a few times. The shock wave of the explosion came again, and the intensity of the explosion was no weaker than the previous explosion of the falling metal ball. Li Ming's eyes widened a little, and he looked at the explosion place in surprise, and his brows tightened again. At this time, Lang smiled lightly and said, "No matter who you are, it's not easy to get the Zinti. If you are unlucky, you may die at any time." Lang's calm voice said lightly. Although Li Ming had retreated far away, he still heard this sentence very clearly, thinking to himself, "Sure enough, this person also came for the Zinti." The dust and smoke gradually dissipated, and before he could see the place after the explosion, a hearty laugh suddenly came out. "Ha ha ha. That gentleman." After hearing it, people can clearly feel the excitement and happiness in the other party's heart, without a trace of doubt. But it was this laughter that made Li Ming and Lang stunned at the same time. Even if an explosion of that magnitude would not kill, it would at least hurt people. After all, it was very sudden and powerful, but this kind of laughter made Li Ming confused. The dust and smoke had dissipated, and a big pit was blown out of the ruins. Hornston put his hands on his waist, still smiling, without the slightest anger. Lang looked up at the sky and said, "As a warrior, the two most enjoyable things in a limited life are nothing more than worshipping the goddess in my mind and playing the most exciting game. This game in front of me is very much to my liking. If you guess correctly, you will get a prize, and if you guess wrong, you will be punished. Ha 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 ha. This feeling reminds me of worshipping at the feet of the goddess, and I feel that the cells in my whole body are beating. It's simply too exciting." Hornston shouted excitedly, and this excitement even made Li Ming grin, as if he was really infected by the other party. But Li Ming's expression was the same as Lang's at this time, completely hard, even unbelievable. Hornston's behavior has exceeded the cognition of these two people. Lang's expression twitched slightly, and he couldn't help whispering, this guy, actually." The voice was very low, but as soon as he finished speaking, Hornston suddenly turned his head to look at the other party, his face slightly ugly, and said sternly, "Don't tell me the answer." As he said this, Hornston's figure flashed and disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already above the building complex, looking around, as if he was picking something. Lang's face was full of anger at this moment, gritting his teeth. His fierce expression was extremely angry, his mouth kept shaking, and it took a long time for him to say a sentence. "You guy, you underestimated the puny civilization too much." As soon as the voice fell, Lang's figure suddenly moved and flew out. As soon as the figure approached, his right hand swung out, and the moment his right arm swung, the black shadow that was originally attached to Lang's body suddenly turned into a sharp blade and swept out. The blade was transformed from a black shadow, just like black ink. When it was swung, the energy in the black shadow burst out, as if it was going to cut Hornston in two. Hornston was looking at the building below, looking like he didn't expect the opponent to attack suddenly. A light sound of snap was heard. The seemingly powerful black shadow blade actually hit Hornston, but after this slash, Lang not only did not feel proud, but frowned, with a look of surprise on his face. Actually, how is it possible? Lang did not dare to stay any longer and hurriedly jumped back and retreated directly 100 meters away. This attack was obviously successful and he could continue to pursue and form a combo, but Lang retreated immediately after succeeding. Li Ming did not understand at first, but he immediately discovered something with his keen eyes. He opened his mouth slightly and was stunned, thinking to himself, under that kind of attack, actually, Li Ming had almost the same expression as Lang, but he looked back at Hornston, standing there unharmed. He looked at Lang who was retreating far away. He lowered his head slightly and looked at his body. There was no scar on his body, as if he had never been attacked. However, there was a small cut of about an inch long at the bottom of his shirt. Seeing the damage to his clothes, Hornston's expression suddenly changed. His eyes were fierce, and two flames seemed to be burning in his eye sockets. He looked at Lang in the distance with angry eyes. His mouth trembled slightly, and a few words came out from his teeth. "This is my favorite clothes." Hornston's body suddenly glowed with white light, and powerful energy burst out of his body like white flames. The momentum made Li Ming look shocked. The energy change in the second interval was indeed extraordinary. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 621, Real Box. He raised his right hand slowly, and white energy continued to flow in his palm. A white shadow hammer emerged from his palm. The hammer was not big, more than 1 meter long. The hammerhead was a huge square body, and there was a cross symbol on all 4 sides. The whole hammer was completely formed by energy. Although it was not big, it was breathtaking. Hornston held the handle of the hammer tightly, aimed at Lang in the distance and hit it hard, and shouted at the same time, "Hammer of Confusion." The moment his right hand swung, the shadow hammer suddenly grew and grew larger. When it fell completely, the entire shadow hammer was already 100 meters long and huge. Falling straight from Lang's head, the huge hammer face was like a mountain patrolling down, and the cross symbol on the hammer face was clearly visible. Before the hammer fell, the powerful energy breath had already pressed in. Li Ming narrowed his eyes slightly, and his figure flashed and ran straight to the ground. At this time, Lang gritted his teeth tightly and naturally couldn't dodge. He raised his hands suddenly and raised them above his head. The posture was like he was going to lift something. With this movement, the black shadow on the body surface rotated, and a black vortex kept rotating with Lang's body as the center. Ah! He shouted loudly and stretched out his hands suddenly. The black vortex rose up, and a black circular barrier rose up around him, like a phantom sphere of a black ball, completely wrapping Lang in the middle. The moment the phantom black sphere was formed, the white phantom hammer also fell down. From a distance, it looked like a hammer hitting a black ball. A muffled sound of bang was heard, and powerful energy spread out with a collision of the two objects. The shock wave swept around with strong winds. But just 1 second later, a loud boom sounded, and the phantom energy of the two collapsed at once. The ground within a range of several kilometers suddenly shook, as if the crust in the entire area was about to be shaken up. If you look down from a high altitude, it's like a hammer hitting an iron plate. At this time, any object on the iron plate will be shaken up, and the ground at this time is also like this. The Earth's crust several meters below the surface was torn apart and rose up, reaching a height of more than 10 meters in the air. In an instant, all objects in the entire area were turned into ruins and debris, and the buildings were completely gone. Even the spherical buildings in the sky were shaken and cracked. At this time, Li Ming had already gone deep into the ground and opened his consciousness completely. King Lang also began a carpet search. At this moment, Li Ming was looking for the whereabouts of Zinti. The debris that was shaken up on the ground had fallen back to the ground little by little, and the white light energy and black shadow energy turned into starlight and faded in the air. Lang half squatted on the ground and panted. Although he was not injured, his pale face showed fatigue. He raised his eyes slightly and looked at Hornston in the distance, thinking, in the same area, there is such a big gap. This guy's strength. Hornston in the distance was calm. After glancing at Lang, he snorted disdainfully. He looked around and saw that the surroundings were already a ruin. He rubbed his hands in front of his chest and said excitedly, "Now, the game can continue." As he spoke, he glanced slightly, and within the golden light sensing, a metal box had appeared in his eyes. Deep in the ruins, the metal box was still very conspicuous, which was the effect of the golden light sensing. "Then let's take this one," he said casually, stretched out his hand, and grabbed in that direction. With a muffled sound of bang, the ruins exploded, and a silver object flew out. Hornston grabbed the metal box in his hand. Hornston did not open it immediately, but looked at it carefully. Lang in the distance just stared at it, without saying a word or moving. The energy consumed by the previous attack was too much, and it was slowly recovering at this time. At this time, Li Ming was underground. Looking at Hornston's actions, his brows frowned slightly, his eyes widened a little, and whispered, "It seems that the metal box is the key." But Li Ming turned his eyes and found that there were dozens of identical metal boxes deep underground, which gave Li Ming a headache. Li Ming had seen the metal box before. If it was fake, it would explode violently when opened. The power was extraordinary. It was difficult for Li Ming to resist it with his current strength. Fortunately, Li Ming's Kinglan restraint directly passed through the metal box and used it to directly spy on the objects inside the metal box. It was just that there were so many now that it would take some time. The most important thing was that the deep underground was also in the golden light. Li Ming needed to be extra careful and avoid Hornston's sight as much as possible. Once he was discovered, it would be a big deal. Thinking of this, Li Ming opened his mouth slightly and whispered, "Then we can only use the flying dragon to check one by one." Li Ming began to check the metal boxes one by one, and Hornston on the ground had already gently placed his left hand on the metal box in his hand, with a slight smile on his mouth and his eyes full of expectation. With a slight force on his left hand, a light squeak sound was heard. Boom. A loud noise was heard again, and the sound of the explosion turned into a shock wave that spread out in all directions. The shock wave and the flames engulfed the sky, and Hornston's figure also disappeared in the explosion. Li Ming, who was underground, also clearly felt the violent vibration. This also shows that the box that Hornston just got was fake. As long as Hornston didn't find the real box, Li Ming still had a chance. Feilong shuffled quickly underground, and those metal boxes naturally couldn't stop Feilong from entering. After searching for a while, Li Ming's eyes suddenly lit up, and he smiled a little. Surprisingly, it's really as in body. At this time, Feilong had locked onto a certain metal box, and Li Ming moved underground and went straight to the box. When he came to the location of the box, Li Ming showed a look of surprise, because through Feilong's observation, there was not one body in the metal box, but 4. Such a large number. For Li Ming, it was like obtaining the supreme treasure. Li Ming, who had always been eager to advance, could obtain this thing, just like a person who was eager for wealth suddenly obtained a treasure. However, something unusual happened on the ground at this time. The smoke and dust after the explosion slowly faded away, and Hornston showed a little disappointment, but he was still in high spirits. But Larenai in the distance was already a little uneasy, because if this continued, the real box would be found by Hornston sooner or later. Just as Hornston looked around, there was a sudden buzzing sound in the sky. 3 giant disk spaceships had approached, like 3 huge dark clouds, covering the sky and the sun. The spaceships were only a few hundred meters away from the ground, and the metal devices and lights at the bottom of the spaceships could even be clearly seen. The appearance of the 3 spaceships attracted everyone's attention. Hornston couldn't help but look up and stared at the sky. Even Li Ming underground also discovered the existence of the 3 spaceships, but the faces of the 2 were relatively solemn and a bit ugly. At this time, Larenai smiled slightly, glanced at the sky, then looked at Hornston, and whispered, "The reinforcement had finally arrived. In this way, Zinti can be saved." As he muttered to himself, he slowly stood up from the ground, and his momentum instantly increased a little. Even the look in his eyes, when he looked at Hornston, changed. Li Ming also frowned, thinking, have the reinforcement arrived? In this case, we must hurry up. As he muttered to himself, Li Ming raised his hand and grabbed the metal box, but just when Li Ming's hand just touched the box, the metal box suddenly burst. Lang, who was far away on the ground, opened his eyes wide and looked at the ruins in the distance. At the same time, he looked down at his left wrist and saw a faint light flashing, a red dot flashing quickly, and a beep alarm sounded. What's going on? Has anyone found the real box? Lang didn't understand, but just looked in that direction nervously, and there was nothing else there, except a pile of ruins and debris. At this time, Hornston did not notice the change in Lang's expression. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "It seems that the game can't continue, but I will accept all these boxes. I will play slowly when I get back, haha." Chapter 622, Strange Metal Box. Hornston raised his hand slowly, and at the same time, golden light appeared on the palms of his hands again. The golden light at this time was almost the same as the previous induction golden light, but the use of energy had changed. Close to the water, Hornston suddenly shouted. The ground trembled slightly, and the rubble ruins on the ground shook in place as if dancing. After a few seconds, a light hum sound was heard. The previous golden light induction was taken back and returned to Hornston's hands. As the golden light returned, a series of bang 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 sounds were heard on the ground of the ruins, and silver objects shot out from the ground. Like small animals jumping out of the ground, dozens of metal boxes flew towards Hornston. Even the metal box that Li Ming had already caught flew out. Li Ming's face changed when he saw this, and he exerted force on his hands. Green light flashed, and several green shadow vines sprang out of Li Ming's hands, tightly binding the metal box and Li Ming's arms together. Despite this, Li Ming was still forcibly pulled out from the ground under the traction of this powerful force. There was a slight bang in the ruins, and Li Ming held the metal box tightly with one hand, and half of his body was exposed outside the ruins. At this time, Li Ming had returned to his original appearance. It was under the effect of this traction that the transformation was forcibly ended. The outstretched arm tightly grasped the metal box, and the metal box was still flying in the air towards Hornston, but under Li Ming's energy, the box could no longer move. However, Li Ming's sudden emergence from the ground attracted the attention of Hornston and Language. The eyes of the two immediately focused on Li Ming. Li Ming's expression tightened when he saw this, and his eyes widened a little. He secretly said, "Damn, I was still noticed." At this point, Li Ming no longer cared about it. He suddenly exerted force with his right hand again, and a blue light suddenly flashed. The metal box disappeared in Li Ming's hand, and was collected by Li Ming. After doing all this, Li Ming suddenly leaped up from the ground, and the cape behind him turned into wings and flew away. Hornston glanced at Li Ming's figure and didn't care. After all, the other boxes were in his hands, and even if he calculated the probability, Hornston had a huge advantage. Dozens of boxes fell into Hornston's hands at once, and disappeared completely like spheres being put into a bag. Lang glanced at Hornston, but his attention was still focused on the direction where Li Ming fled. However, Lang did not chase him immediately, because any action at this moment would attract Hornston's attention. Although Lang knew that Li Ming took the real box, he didn't want Hornston to doubt it, so his eyes returned to Hornston. Hornston raised his hand and pointed to the sky. A blue light flashed on his wrist, and a beam of light shot out. This beam of light was a phantom light ball, and the spaceship that passed through the sky went straight into space. After doing all this, Hornston smiled and said, "See you next time." As soon as he finished speaking, a blue beam of light suddenly shot down from the deep space of the universe. That beam of light was exactly the beamline Hornston had previously launched. With a muffled hum, the beam of light enveloped Hornston in an instant. A second later, Hornston disappeared with the beam of light. The whole process was completed in an instant, extremely fast. The three spaceships in the sky did not react. Lang was also stunned for a moment, and after looking at the deep space, his face was full of anger. After all, this is a place controlled by the second level civilization world. It is naturally a loss of face to let an invader come and go freely, but facing the space transmission ability, Lang is helpless. He withdrew his attention from space, looked at the direction where Li Ming escaped, and said viciously, "No one should run." As soon as the voice fell, his figure flashed, and flew towards the huge round spaceship in the sky. At this moment, in the space of church, a U-shaped spaceship trembled slightly, and a faint light flashed on the surface. It disappeared from the spot with a bang. When the U-shaped spaceship appeared again, it was already outside the distant Swarth galaxy group. Just as the U-shaped spaceship teleported away, another capsule spaceship also flew into space quickly and flew to the distance without slowing down at all. Both spaceships left church, but behind them, two giant disc-shaped spaceships also split into two groups and quickly chased after them. In the U-shaped spaceship that had already escaped to the outside of the Swarth galaxy group, Hornston came to the main cabin with satisfaction, with a smile on his face, and said, "The mission is completed. Can you take me to see Rathalia?" Jinbuch, who had been standing in front of the operating table, smiled happily and replied, of course, we can return to the Larazel base now." As he said this, Jinbuch lightly clicked on the operating table and locked a certain airspace. At the same time, Li Ming was riding a capsule spaceship and heading straight to the distance. But Li Ming, who was standing in front of the operating table, looked unhappy because a giant disc-shaped spaceship had been following him in the distance. The capsule spaceship was also a product of the technology of the second-level civilization. Its defense and combat power were extremely weak, but its teleportation and flight capabilities were no less than those of other second-level civilization spaceships. Li Ming set up the teleportation point and let the spaceship teleport on its own. Although he could not get rid of the disc-shaped spaceship behind him, he could not be caught up by the other party. The spaceship teleported on its own, and it was gradually moving away from the Swarth galaxy group, but it also gradually entered the unknown starfield. Galaxy groups or galaxy clusters are places where large galaxies gather. Far away from these places is the most desolate place in the universe. It's like an uninhabited area or a desert. Space-time spaceships are often used to cross the distance between galaxy groups, but in the absence of space-time spaceships, they can only rely on the spaceship's own judgment to teleport and fly. Although this airspace is far away from galaxy groups or galaxy clusters, there are planets and star systems, and even large galaxies, but the number will be very small. In this dark environment, the spaceships of a second-level civilization will determine the safe coordinates and teleport, based on their own radars, and this airspace with fewer galaxies is called a void. In order to stay away from the Pumi people, Li Ming's spaceship has entered the void. There are very few galaxies and wandering planets here. Of course, this is the place with the most unknowns and secrets in the universe. Even the second-level civilization has rarely explored this place, so it is natural that it will not easily enter it. The capsule spaceship's teleportation will not catch up for a while, so Li Ming didn't care and sat down on the ground in the main cabin. At this time, Li Ming was still in excitement. He couldn't wait to flip his right hand, and the metal box he just got appeared. There are 4 Zin bodies in it, enough for me to reach the top of the second-level civilization. Ha ha ha. Li Ming couldn't help laughing out loud, with a proud look on his face. He kept stroking the metal box with both hands, as if observing some kind of treasure, and couldn't let it go. He slowly lifted the metal box with his right hand, and placed his left hand on the surface of the box, just preparing to open it. He exerted a little force with his left hand, and his brows frowned. The metal box didn't change at all. The whole metal box was like a silver metal block, and there was no place to open it. This made Li Ming frown. However, Li Ming was not panicked. He gently held the box with his right hand. A little bit of green light emanated from his hand. The green halo wrapped the metal box like smoke. After a careful sense, Li Ming took a deep breath. "Isn't this a box?" Li Ming showed a look of surprise. Through sensing, Li Ming found something strange. This metal box is indeed extraordinary. In addition to the 4 Zin bodies inside, the entire metal box has no connecting gaps, as if it is a hole. Of course, since the Zin body can be put into it, the metal box must have been made later, but the craftsmanship is relatively special. After a careful sense, Li Ming did not find any abnormalities, and there was not even a trace of opening. This made Li Ming start to worry. He stared at the metal box in his hand, and fell into thinking. After all, if it cannot be opened, Li Ming's efforts will be in vain. Chapter 623, Goddess Redelia. He placed the metal box on the ground with his left hand, and slowly raised his right hand. A white light flashed in his palm, and a light blade appeared in his hand. The light blade condensed by Li Ming's energy had a strong cutting ability. Now it was better to try a violent method. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and the light blade slowly cut down. A sizzling sound was heard immediately. After the light blade touched the metal box, it was as bright as electric welding, dazzling, and dazzling, making it impossible to look directly at it. But Li Ming could clearly sense that the light blade was cutting with all its strength with his wisdom eyes. After a moment, the light blade slowly faded from Li Ming's hand. At this time, looking at the metal box again, Li Ming's eyes immediately widened a little. Fuck. This thing is actually so hard, Li Ming said to himself in astonishment. He just used the light blade to cut, and the metal box was intact, but there was only a trace of friction on the surface. Seeing this scene, Li Ming was completely unable to sit still. This treasure was in his hands, but he couldn't use it, which was really uncomfortable. Li Ming was still worrying about how to open the metal box, but laughter was heard in another place. On a flat brick ground, a group of aliens of all kinds kept cheering. The aliens here were all kinds of strange, as if they were representatives of various races. Right in front of the crowd was a spaceship that had landed completely on the ground. A hatch in front of the spaceship slowly opened, and two aliens walked out of it. These two were Jinbuge and Hornston. Seeing the welcoming crowd, Jinbuge smiled and waved, then took Hornston away. On both sides of the crowd were blocks of building areas. The buildings here were all single-story small houses, and there was also a small courtyard, just like a rural village. And right behind the crowd was a 100-meter wide staircase that led directly to the heights, and there were also different buildings on both sides of the staircase. As for the top of the staircase, it was a huge palace building, extremely tall. Looking along the staircase, you can only see the top of the huge palace. Okay, everyone, go away. Elder Jinbuge and I have something important to discuss. On the steps behind the crowd, an alien waved his arms and said. The almond buyer was only about 1 meter tall, about the same height as Jinbuge, with light blue skin and a nose more than half a foot long sticking out of his face. He was wearing a grey cloak that covered his entire body, and the hood also covered most of his head. Looking from the side, it seemed as if only a nose was sticking out from under the hat. After hearing this person's voice, the alien group leader slowly dispersed. Jinbuge came to the steps and walked directly to the top of the steps, saying as he walked, "How is the situation here, Master Vega?" The man named Vega turned around and forgot about the group leader behind him, and also walked to the top of the steps, saying, "The situation is not optimistic. The number of refugees is still increasing, and we may need to set up a new base. Why are you here? Didn't you go back to the headquarters?" Vega asked back. Jinbuge glanced at Hornston behind him and said, "It's a long story for me. Let's talk about it later. Oh, by the way, is Miss Redelia still here?" Vega looked puzzled, turned his head, and glanced at Hornston, and replied, "She is waiting in the main hall." Hearing that Redelia was here, Jinbuge breathed a sigh of relief, and said as he quickened his pace, "That's really great. Going up the steps step by step, when you reach the top, you will come to a wide and flat blue brick ground, as if this is the ground, and the previous one is just underground. There is no end in sight, and there are buildings everywhere. The surrounding buildings are relatively short, only the one at the entrance of the steps is relatively tall, with a magnificent surface. There is a small step at the door, leading directly to the main hall entrance, and there are 2 golden beads on each side of the main hall entrance, and strange alien characters are carved on the surface of the beads. After climbing up the steps from the underground, there was still more than 100 meters away from the main hall. In a blink of an eye, the 3 of them came to the small steps in front of the main hall. At this time, a figure in the main hall just appeared. This person was nearly 2 meters tall, with black hair and 2 pink ribbons tied behind his hair, which flew in the air with his hair. He had a pair of big eyes, bright as stars, and there were 2 pink 5-pointed star patterns outside the corners of his eyes. I don't know if it was a decoration or a tattoo. His cherry mouth was slightly closed, and his rosy face seemed transparent, making people want to reach out and pinch it. The clothes on his upper body were light yellow and white silk fabrics, and beautiful flowers were woven on his chest, as if the clothes on his upper body were a flower, and the petals fluttered in the wind. Below the petals was his abdomen, and the clothes on his lower body were almost the same as the upper body, also light yellow with white silk fabrics, and there was also a flower hanging around his waist. The white legs were exposed, and the feet on the ground were like jade. This person was Retilia. Jinbuj and Vega were calm and there was no abnormality, but Hornston behind them had already stared blankly with his eyes wide open. Jinbuj turned around and looked at Hornston's dull eyes, frowning slightly, and then his eyes quickly turned to Retilia and said, "Retilia, this is Hornston you rescued last time. I won't introduce him to you. Now Hornston is also our honored guest. Please entertain him. I have something to discuss with Master Vega." As he said this, Jinbuj pulled Vega's clothes and walked to the side of the hall. Hornston didn't seem to notice the two people leaving. His eyes were still fixed on Retilia, and then he suddenly bent forward and knelt on the ground with his head pressed tightly against the ground and his hands patted on the ground. He opened his mouth and said in an extremely respectful and hearty voice, "Respected Goddess Retilia, can you allow your most loyal servant, me, Hornston, to kiss your feet?" "No." As soon as Hornston spoke, Retilia roared angrily, put her left hand on her waist, raised her right hand, and a pink metal rod flashed in her palm. The metal rod was more than 2 feet long, with a white bud on one end and a blooming light yellow and white flower on the other end. Her face was full of fierceness, as if she had guessed that Hornston would say this. The metal rod in her right hand was ready to take action at any time. At this time, in a small building on the side of the palace, Jinbuj was chatting with Vega. The two were sitting at the window, and they could just see where Hornston was. "This time I have personally tested Hornston's strength, and successfully brought back the Zinti from the Pumi people's battle base." Jinbuj glanced at Hornston not far away and said seriously. Vega was shocked when he heard this. His eyes widened a little, and he asked quickly, "Where is the Zinti?" Jinbuj looked at Hornston's position again and said, "It's still on him now. I will ask him to take it out later." Vega nodded gently, but his expression was still a little shocked. His mouth slightly opened, and said, "With the strength of one person, we can get the Zinti from the Xinjiang base. This is exactly what we, Zapping organization need." Jinbuj also nodded repeatedly when he heard this, but sighed slightly, and after hesitating for a while, he said, "I have tried my best to invite him, but he completely refused." Falling asleep like this, Jinbuj looked at Hornston outside with a regretful expression on his face, and his eyes looked at Hornston outside again. At the same time, Li Ming, who was in the empty starfield of the universe, was still letting the spaceship teleport freely, but the round spaceship that had been following Li Ming was nowhere to be seen. The operating table was empty, with only the wandering planet where more appeared. Li Ming sat cross-legged quietly on the ground, his eyes closed, concentrating on resting, thinking to himself, "I can only find a way to open the metal box later." This helpless sigh came from Li Ming's heart, because Li Ming had tried his best, but still couldn't do anything about the metal box, so he could only give up this idea temporarily and let the spaceship teleport freely. Li Ming planned to use this time to do something else. With a flip of his right hand, a scroll appeared in Li Ming's hand with blue light, and then his left hand was placed on his legs. The scroll slowly opened by itself, and lay flat on Li Ming's hands. Chapter 624, Lang's Opportunity. The scroll was the Cheyenne star book that Li Ming had obtained from Han Sajia Bihuang civilization. Li Ming had only read the contents roughly at that time. He took it out now to take a closer look. Cheyenne was divided into 2 parts. Li Ming had not read the lower part carefully. Now Li Ming's attention was completely focused on the upper part. The upper part was exactly what Li Ming had read roughly at the beginning, about the use and cultivation of the artifact. Li Ming's initial understanding of the artifact was to refine the artifact, then own it, and use it as a weapon. Li Ming had used it many times, and it also helped Li Ming escape danger at critical moments. This was just Li Ming's understanding of the artifact. However, after seeing the Cheyenne Star book, Li Ming's understanding also changed dramatically. The use of the artifact is not that simple. If you want to fully use the power of the artifact, you must not only be aware of refining the artifact, but also be aware of the assimilation of the body and the artifact, so that you can fully exert the power of the artifact. The maximization of the power of the artifact includes 3 factors. The first is refining, which Li Ming has already met. The second is consciousness assimilation, which Li Ming has also met. The last point is physical assimilation, which Li Ming has just learned. It is no wonder that no matter how hard Li Ming tried before, the power of the artifact was only limited. Of course, there is a taboo in using artifacts, that is, the energy consumption of artifacts is huge, so having enough energy is the guarantee for using artifacts for a long time. If the energy isn't sufficient, the time to find the artifact will be shortened, but after meeting the above 3 standards, the power will not be affected. However, the use of artifacts will consume the original energy to a certain extent under certain special conditions, which is a double-edged sword. Seeing this, Li Ming has already understood it. Then Li Ming will practice the artifact around the assimilation of the body. As for the consumption of original energy, it also varies from person to person. This is related to the result of physical assimilation. Therefore, Li Ming still needs to assimilate first, before he can know. Of course, this also makes Li Ming understand why Bihuang civilization can be arrogant with artifacts. With the star status of Cheyenne, Bihuang civilization can naturally maximize the power of the artifact, and will not be afraid of any powerful enemy. The users of the artifacts of Bihuang civilization are inherited. This system has a lot to do with the use of nature and artifacts, because when the artifacts are assimilated in the final body, the different assimilation results will result in the consumption of the original energy, so this inheritance system is extremely critical. Humph, how can I be the result of consuming the original energy? Li Ming said to himself with a face full of confidence. The 3 steps are recorded in detail on Cheyenne. As long as you practice according to the above methods, you can achieve the goal. Li Ming has the 6th domain enhanced star status, so the speed of practice is naturally extraordinary. With his eyes closed, his mind is highly concentrated. With a flip of his right hand, he took out Niteng. At this moment, Li Ming began to practice the assimilation of the artifact. At this moment, on the planet Pulpus in the Swarth Galaxy group, in a huge circular building, 2 aliens were sitting opposite each other and talking. On one side was Gripina, and on the other side was Language. Gripina is a senior officer of the Pumi civilization, second only to the general, in charge of the major battle bases and defense systems. Lang, as the highest leader of the spiritual civilization battle base, naturally has to give an explanation for the incident of the looting of the Zinti. Gripina looked at Lang for a long time and said, "You should be very clear about the guilt of losing the Zinti. The most important thing is, you don't even know where the looting force came from. Don't you think that whoever you say this to will be furious?" Lang looked at Gripina calmly and said quietly, "I will definitely get the Zinti back, and I can promise you." Gripina smiled disdainfully and said, "Lang, do you think the upper level will give you a chance to explain?" Lang paused after hearing this. His face suddenly became serious, and he said again, "I need a chance. If I can't get the Zinti back, I will die to apologize." With a firm look, an affirmative tone, and full of confidence, Lang's words seemed to be able to get the Zinti back at any time. Gripina just looked at the other party quietly, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Now in our spiritual civilization's battle base, you are the only one who is our Pumi people, and the others are foreigners, so the upper level has always been very concerned about you. Spiritual civilization is very rare, so your position is extremely critical. I will help you delay the time with the upper level. During this time, whether you can get back the Zinti depends on you." Gripina said. Lang suddenly opened his eyes wide when he heard this, and then stood up and said, "Thank you for the opportunity given to me by Chief Gripina. I will definitely live up to everyone's expectations." Gripina closed her eyes slightly, waved at her, and said no more. Lang naturally understood what the other party meant. After gritting his teeth, he turned around and left. Spiritual civilization is rare. Even if it is cultivated, the spiritual consciousness talent of aliens is also extremely high, but Zinti is also an equally precious thing. The sin of losing Zinti is naturally not something Lang can bear. This is mainly because there are internal differences in the views of Pumi civilization on spiritual civilization. One side believes that spiritual civilization should be abandoned directly and replaced with technology. The other side believes that technological induction cannot obtain other people's inner thoughts after all, and has more shortcomings. so Lang's position is somewhat awkward. If he is not careful, his position may be lost. Even though the existence of spiritual civilization is extremely important, it cannot resist reality. It is more important that Gripina can give him this opportunity. At this moment, the Larazel base is floating in the vacuum of the universe. The Larazel base is one of the many bases of the Zupping organization. This base floats in the vacuum of the universe like a planet. The base is formed by converting a small planet. The whole base looks like a city floating in the universe, and there is a blue shield on the outermost edge of the base, which looks like the atmosphere in the planetary defense system. Outside the huge palace on the base, Jinbuge and Hornston walked on the blue bricks. Ratilia has seen it. Should we take the things out? Jinbuge said after glancing at the other party. Hornston stood straight with a serious look on his face. He raised his right hand and took out a metal box, saying, "Here is what you want. But when can I see the goddess Lathalia again?" As soon as Jinbug saw the metal box, he smiled quietly, raised his hand, and took the metal box in his hand, saying, "I have to wait until I check the things inside." As he said this, Jinbug suddenly stopped, looked at a small building not far away, looked back at Hornston, and said, "Wait here first." As he spoke, Jinbug had already walked towards the building. This is a building shorter than the palace, located on the side of the palace. As soon as Jinbug entered it, he saw Vega waiting in the house. He smiled slightly and put the metal box on the table. "This is the harvest of Church Star. How do you plan to distribute it?" Jinbug said after sitting down at the table. Vega looked at the metal box, took it in front of him, and said, "I haven't figured out how to distribute it. I don't know if the quantity inside is the same as what the intelligence said." With that, Vega raised his hand and prepared to open the box. At this time, Hornston was still waiting outside quietly, looking in the direction of the house. He seemed to suddenly think of something, and his eyes widened a little. "Oh no, that box might." Boom. There was a loud noise, and flames burst out. The building turned into ruins and disappeared in the smoke. When the smoke dissipated, Jinbug and Vega were covered in a layer of green light. They were not injured. Jinbug turned his head and looked at Hornston angrily. "Hornston, what's going on?" Jinbug suddenly shouted. Chapter 625 A Man's Perfect Moment. On the flat ground, Hornston squatted on the ground without moving. Jinbuge and Vega stood behind Hornston. They just stared at him without saying a word. There were already dozens of metal boxes in front of Hornston. He continued to put them on the ground with his hands and said to himself, 34, 35, 36. After putting the last one, Hornston turned around and said, "All the metal boxes are here. One of them must be real, and the fake ones will explode once opened." Jinbuge and Vega looked at each other. "Then open them all, and you will know." Rhodelia came over at some point and said so. As soon as he saw Athalia, Hornston's eyes widened, and he whispered excitedly, "I didn't expect to see the goddess again so soon." Jinbuge looked back at the metal boxes with a serious expression, saying, "The explosion inside was very powerful. Fortunately, the room scoring defense mechanism was activated, otherwise even Vega and I would have been in trouble." Thinking of the previous explosion, Jinbuge's expression was still a little scared. Vega also frowned slightly and became a little worried. However, Hornston ignored the expressions and actions of the two people. He just stared at Rathalia with his eyes and said, "Respected goddess Rathalia, can you allow your most loyal servant, I, Hornston?" Bang. Before Hornston finished speaking, Rathalia swung the metal rod in her hand and hit Hornston's face with one end of the flower bud. Hornston turned over and flew out directly. Pop. When Hornston landed, he was already in the metal box that was placed earlier. The metal boxes were scattered around, occupying a large area of the blue brick floor. Hornston fell into it at once, flipped his body, and tried to stand up. However, the place where Hornston held his hand was the edge of a metal box. Jinbug noticed this. His face suddenly changed, and he exclaimed, "Be careful." It was too late when he said this. Hornston's hand pressed on the edge of the box with a few fingers, and the metal box flipped and bounced up from the ground, and opened directly in the air 1 foot high. Boom! A loud noise was heard, and the flames and shockwaves spread out. The violent explosion made the earth tremble slightly. At this time, Jinbug and others opened their eyes wide, staring blankly without saying a word. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated, and only a small pit appeared on the hard ground. The soil here is different from that of ordinary planets, and even such a powerful explosion did not cause much damage. The smoke and dust completely disappeared, and Hornston was seen kneeling on the ground, his forehead touching the ground, his hands stretched out on the ground in front of him, with a pious look, and he said loudly, "I'm really sorry for being so rude in front of the goddess." Jinbuj was still a little worried, but when he saw this scene, he was immediately stunned. The muscles on his face twitched slightly, and his trembling lips whispered, without any defense. He actually used his body to block the power of the explosion. Rathilia on the side was also pale, her face was dull, and she looked at it quietly with her mouth wide open. After a long while, she said, "Wow, so amazing." These words were very light and small, even Jinbuj and Vega on the side didn't hear clearly, but Hornston's ears moved slightly in the distance. His eyes suddenly opened, and he suddenly stood up from where he was. It turns out, only absolute strength can win the favor of the goddess. Hornston thought secretly, and his eyes also looked at Rathilia's surprised expression, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Next, let me open the real box now." As he spoke, Hornston slowly raised his hands, and the palms of his hands were still shining with golden light, and a golden energy sphere appeared. Snappy put his hands together in front of his chest, and whispered at the same time, "Water lily." Bang! After a muffled sound, the golden shadow sphere spread out. This time the golden shadow was relatively small, covering only a dozen meters around Hornston. The two closed palms exerted force again, and Hornston's eyebrows tightened. The golden light flashed slightly, and the metal boxes that were previously blown away by the explosion and the metal boxes that were not blown away by the explosion all flew up. More than 30 metal boxes appeared in the golden shadow sphere in a short while. Hornston's eyes moved, and he looked at the metal boxes floating around his body, confirmed the number, and then raised his mouth slightly, whispering, "All of them are here." Seeing this, Jinbuj frowned slightly, and whispered in confusion, "What is this guy going to do?" Vega looked at this scene with a puzzled look. At this time, Hornston had clasped his hands and let go, revealing a slight smile. This smile looked ordinary, but Jinbuj found a hint of abnormality in it. His eyes widened a little, his mouth opened slightly, and he said in horror, "Could it be that this guy's going to open all the boxes at the same time?" As soon as this sentence came out, Vega on the side was also stunned. The power of a box explosion is so powerful, and more than 30 boxes exploded at the same time. Even if it was a third level civilization of the second level, it would be impossible to resist. Although Hornston has a 2.6 level civilization, and is at the top of the second level, it is impossible to withstand such a powerful explosion with his flesh or shield. "Idiot. You'll die if you do this," Jinbuj suddenly shouted. Hornston snorted, slowly closed his eyes, and whispered, "Being able to show myself in front of the goddess, this is the most perfect moment for a man." With a loud shout, Hornston raised his hand slightly. At this time, all the metal boxes opened a gap at the same time. At this moment, each gap released a dazzling light. There were more than 30 boxes, and the light was so bright that people couldn't look directly at it. Jinbuj and others quickly raised their arms to cover their eyes. Boom. The violent explosion sounded in the golden shadow sphere. The harsh explosion sound could be heard, and the dazzling light could be seen, but the shockwave and damage caused by the explosion could not be felt at all. All the explosions occurred in the golden shadow sphere, without affecting the outside world at all, just like more than 30 grenades were detonated in a closed space at the same time. Its power is naturally self-evident. After all, without the energy diffusion in a wide space, the damage caused by the explosion will be more concentrated, which will make the power of the explosion far higher than itself, which is extremely amazing. The golden shadow book was blurred, full of smoke and ruins, and it could not calm down for a long time, and there was no sign of Hornston. Jinbuj and Vega were also stunned on the spot, with their eyes wide open without blinking. Radilia on the side also stared blankly, and even drops of cold sweat flowed out of her forehead. Her originally moving face was now stiff. After a while, the golden shadow sphere dissipated little by little, turning into a little energy starlight, and disappearing in the air, and the smoke and dust inside spread out. When the breeze blew, the smoke and dust disappeared directly. There was no sign of Hornston, only a huge deep pit left in the original place, and everything returned to calm. Jinbuj moved his body and walked forward like a robot, and Vega was also stunned before following. The three of them came to the edge of the pit together. Their faces, which were originally dull, suddenly turned into surprise. They saw a huge and strong figure walking back and forth in the pit, looking for something, and kept muttering, "Where is it? Could it be blown up? Impossible, the body of Zing can't be destroyed." Hornston whispered to himself, after searching for a while. This scene made Jinbug and Vega completely stunned. They looked at each other from time to time, unable to understand or believe it. After a moment, Hornston suddenly raised his head and glanced at the three people above. His figure slowly floated up and came to the air above the ground. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.